Chapter 120. No way. Gong Yimo was especially insistent on this matter, shaking her head like a rattle drum. I want you to show me, I want to see. Now, right now. She had just recovered from a serious injury, so Gong Dai did not dare to disobey her. So even though he was unwilling, he still slowly pulled up his pants. A shocking scar the size of a bowl appeared on his thigh. Even though she was already prepared, when she saw it, Gong Yimo gasped and quickly leaned over to take a look. She was speechless for a long time. Now his wound had already started to scab, but it was still bleeding. It was horrifying. Seeing Gong Yimo leaning over, Gong Dai sat on the bed and shrunk back uncomfortably. His cheeks flushed red, but he felt that the position was a little too awkward. He was a little uncomfortable. But Gong Yimo did not notice this at all. She sat on the edge of the bed and leaned over to take a closer look. That frightening wound made her lose her soul for a long time. This piece of flesh was cut off by him, but he let someone cook it and let her drink it. She did not know why, but she did not feel disgusted at all. She only felt uncomfortable, as if something was boiling in her heart. It made her want to go out and hack Si Wuyen to death. Why are you so stupid? He wants you to bleed, you bleed. He wants you to cut off your flesh, you cut off your flesh. Then what if he wants you to die? You also want to die. Gong Yimo could not help but roar at Gong Dai due to the nameless anger. She did not know who she was angry at, but she just could not control herself. Seeing her like this, Gong Dai smiled very good-naturedly, but his tone was calm and determined. As long as he says he can save you, I will give it to him, even if it is my life. His expression gradually softened, and when he thought that his flesh was eaten by Gong Yimo, Gong Dai actually felt strangely satisfied, as if he and the royal sister had become one. This must be an illness, but what could he do? He could not control this thought. Gong Yimo only bit her lip and looked at him fiercely. After a while, she bent down again and used the best Yurong powder in the palace to apply medicine on him. Unfortunately, her jade countenance powder could regenerate muscles and remove scars, but its main purpose was to remove scars. Its effect on regenerating muscles that were missing a piece of flesh was too limited. The cold cream accompanied her trembling fingertips as it landed on the frightening wound. Under the pain, coldness, and numbness, Gong Dai was very impetuous. He lowered his head and only saw her hair. She lowered her head and almost pressed it against the wound. He couldn't see her expression, but he knew that she was very upset. Gong Dai couldn't help but reach out and stroke her hair. It's okay, it doesn't hurt anymore, really. But as soon as he finished speaking, warm water droplets fell on his legs. 1 drop, 2 drops, they fell silently. Gong Dai was startled and hurriedly straightened her body. It turned out that at some point in time, her face was already covered in tears. How could it not hurt? This injury, you took it for me. She raised her head and glared at Gong Dai with hatred and grievance. Her eyeballs were like pearls with a broken string that kept falling. It doesn't hurt for you, but it hurts for me. Gong Dai couldn't hold it in anymore. He leaned over and hugged her, forcefully carrying her onto the couch. Don't cry. He was very flustered. He was afraid to see Gong Yimo's tears. It would make his heart feel as if it was being torn apart and painful. But he didn't dare to stop her. He couldn't even bear to raise his voice. He could only let Gong Yimo's tears fall drop by drop on his shoulder, repeating it over and over again in an extremely clumsy and helpless manner. Don't cry, being injured for you, I'm willing to endure it. Gong Yimo really couldn't hold it in anymore. That wasn't just a cut, it was a piece of flesh that had been cut off. Seeing that frightening sunken wound, she really couldn't control herself anymore. Gong Yimo sobbed and scolded loudly, that bastard. How could he be so overboard? You're the person I love the most. Sob. My heart aches whenever you bump into something. How could you do such a thing to yourself? I allowed it. Sob, 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 sob. Gong Yimo said as she cried. Every word and sentence made Gong Dai happy and satisfied. But as his heart throbbed, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What did she mean by his heart aching whenever he bumped into something? She was so adorable that it made his heart tremble. He really wanted to kiss the girl who was crying in his arms. Kiss away all her tears and stop her words that made people love and hate her at the same time. But he couldn't. He could only hug her, and in the end, a myriad of emotions converged into a smile. I don't regret it, because you're also the person I love the most. In an instant, Gong Yimo cried even louder. After that, Si Wuyen became much more well-behaved. He seriously concocted medicine for Gong Yimo. For the time being, they didn't find out that he had done anything wrong. As for Gong Dai, he was ordered by Gong Yimo to stay in bed and recuperate. He wasn't allowed to come out. On this day, Gong Yimo was looking through her storage space with some distress. She had the sacred Yurong powder to remove scars in her storage space, but its effect on regenerating muscles was average. It would be great if there was a sacred medicine that could regenerate muscles and bones. Gong Dai's cut on himself was too ruthless. If he had such a scar on his body, wouldn't his wife be frightened when he got married in the future? Gong Yimo subconsciously thought of Si Wuyen. That person really had countless good medicines on him. She was just afraid that he would tamper with them. Everything else was easy to deal with. How could she get something good from him? After thinking for a long time, she didn't have any ideas. She directly knocked on Si Wuyen's door. When Si Wuyen saw that it was her, he was a little surprised. After all, she wanted to strangle him to death before, and now she had the face to come knocking on his door. In terms of shamelessness, Gong Yimo was the first person he had ever seen. Gong Yimo giggled and asked, I just want to know when you, who is known as Gui Jian Cho, will be completely cured of the poison in your body. She acted coquettishly like a little girl, causing Si Wuyen to feel numb all over. Why would he feel numb? Gong Yimo was a girl to begin with. He kept feeling that something was wrong. Si Wuyen sat at the table and poured himself a cup of tea to calm himself down. Then he snorted coldly. Don't worry. With me here, you won't die. Gong Yimo also ran to his side and sat down. She said with a fawning expression, saving one is saving two is also saving. I can forgive you for what you did to Gong Dai before, but it's not too much for you to contribute some medicine, right? Si Wuyen raised his eyebrows and smiled. He said sinisterly, aren't you afraid that I'll poison it? Gong Yimo shook her head. If you dare to poison it, I'll cut off your fingers one by one. What do you think? She said those words with a smile, causing Si Wuyen to feel a chill down his spine. He said sullenly, No. No. Gong Yimo raised her eyebrows. She suddenly raised her voice. No matter what, Yuqi's puppet emperor is still the son of Yuqi's empress dowager. She can't bear to give you such good things. Chapter 121. Her words made Si Wuyen's face turn green and pale. He glared at Gong Yimo angrily. She did not know which words had provoked him, but he looked extremely angry. I don't know what you're talking about. You don't know. Gong Yimo rubbed her chin. How about this? The weather is good today. Why don't we go out for a walk on a horse? Si Wuyen was still feeling annoyed, so she agreed without much thought when she heard this. Gong Yimo informed Jinshi of Gojoseon. Seeing that Gong Dai was resting, she was slightly relieved. Excessive blood loss would cause him to feel sleepy, but he should be fine after a few days. Gong Yimo rode a horse for herself and then picked one for Si Wuyen. Unexpectedly, the horse became very uneasy when Si Wuyen approached it. If the waiter did not hold on to the reins tightly, it would have run away. Gong Yimo laughed. This horse is a war horse. It's a pity that, after retiring, it contracted an illness that makes it unable to see blood. Your clothes are also red, so you should change into another one. As she spoke, she asked someone to bring over a gray robe that had been prepared. Si Wuyen narrowed his eyes. I like red. Gong Yimo said indifferently, that's fine, but I'm preparing to leave the city for a walk at the frontier. You're too eye-catching. If you're shot dead by Liu Ye's soldiers, I won't care. Si Wuyen noticed that Gu Shijiu had changed into a khaki dress in such a short period of time. She knew that Gu Shijiu was not faking it. Although she was reluctant, she still changed into the gray dress with a look of disgust. Only then did he safely get on the horse and steadily leave. Gong Yimo was amused when she saw his dusty appearance. She had long felt that a man wearing red was too flashy. A good-looking man should wear red to show off the color. The two of them left the city one after another, and headed towards the Great Wall. Now that the weather was cold and it had snowed a few times, the wind was painful to the face. Gong Yimo did not mind, but Si Wuyen could not stand it and asked angrily. How did you guess my identity? Gong Yimo urged her horse to walk side by side with him. She smiled and said, if you can know my identity, why can't I know yours? After all, she was a dead person now. He choked and felt angry. Why did he always have to suffer in front of Gong Yimo? Gong Yimo looked at the snowy mountains in the distance. They were majestic and magnificent. Until now, those mountain peaks that were too high above sea level were still pure lands. No one had gone up there. On the ground, there was a mixture of gray, yellow, and white, extending into the distance as far as the eye could see, causing one's heart to become vast and open up. Gong Yimo took a deep breath. Si Wuyen followed Gong Yimo's gaze. He did not know why, but he also had the same feeling. But it was very strange. It was not his first time seeing the scenery beyond the Great Wall, but it was the first time he felt his heart open up. He couldn't help but look at the girl beside him. She was clearly wearing yellow clothes, but her snowy little face seemed to be glowing under the reflection of the snow. She had a smile on her face as she suddenly glanced over and asked in a soft voice. What made you want to kill me in Gong Dai? Si Wuyen was stunned. It took him a long time to react to what she said. He had a strange expression and slightly frowned. A trace of sadness flashed through his eyes. I don't know what you are talking about. You don't know. Gong Yimo smiled. You let Gong Dai bleed and cut his flesh. Isn't it because you can't get close to him, so you want to use me as an opportunity to let him slowly commit suicide? As long as he loses too much blood and loses his guard one day, you will kill him, right? Her words made Si Wuyen's face turn even uglier. As for me, if you didn't poison me to death, Gong Dai would not let you off. You would have done that long ago, right? Now, although I have woken up, the poison in my body has not been removed. Si Wuyen. Others may not know, but how can I not know? Your mother is the world's #1 poison expert. How can a mere scorpion poison harm you? Si Wuyen suddenly opened his mouth. Stop talking. His gloomy gaze fell on Gong Yimo, almost piercing through her. So what if I did it on purpose? So what if you found out? What can you do to me? He curled one corner of his mouth and laughed very fiercely and savagely. Scorpion poison is not difficult for me, but I am the only person in this place who can save you. If you want to force me, you can try. Gong Yimo burst into laughter. If you can be so ruthless to your mother, how can you be a puppet emperor? His face sank. Gong Yimo. Don't think that I don't dare to kill you. Try provoking me again. Gong Yimo hurriedly stretched out her hands and made a gesture of surrender. Okay, I won't say any more. Hey. Look at how obedient I am, you might as well give me the antidote. Look, I have already prepared a fast horse and a luggage for you. She conjured out a bottle of water and a simple luggage. Your identity has already been seen through by me. Why don't we make a deal? As long as you give me the antidote and leave behind a bottle of medicine that can regenerate muscles and bones, I promise that I will not reveal your secret to anyone. Hey, walk straight from here and you will reach Luyi. You can go and harm the people there. Si Wuyen didn't know whether to laugh or cry at her words. What she said was right and the deal was reasonable, but why should he listen to her? You have prepared well. Unfortunately, if I give you the medicine, do you dare to eat it? I dare. Gong Yimo nodded. You did that to Gong Dai, but I didn't kill you. I know your identity and even let you go. With such kindness, it's not good for you to repay kindness with enmity, right? She raised her head and smiled innocently. Her smile was extremely pure and her clear eyes looked at him without blinking. It made him feel as if he was being trusted. For so many years, people only looked at him with disgust or hatred or fear. No one had ever looked at him like this. It was as if she would support whatever he said and believe whatever he did. Unfortunately, he wasn't Gong Dai and didn't have such a close relative. Gong Yimo saw that he really took out a bottle from his sleeve and her eyes lit up. I knew you would have a way. She happily took it. Si Wuyen snorted and laughed coldly. Aren't you afraid that it's poison? Gong Yimo was stunned. It can't be that bad. If you kill me, Gong Dai won't let you off. He won't even let your people off. It's been so long. Don't tell me you don't know my cute little brother's personality. Si Wuyen choked and glared at her fiercely. Gong Yimo didn't notice and smiled as she poured out the pill and swallowed it without hesitation. Her actions were clean and smooth without any hesitation. Seeing that she really ate it just like that, Si Wuyen was very surprised. His mouth was slightly open, as if he wanted to say something. She thought that he would take it back to test for poison or at least test it with a needle. But she ate it just like that. She really trusted him. After Gong Yimo swallowed it, she only felt a cool gas rush down her body. The dull pain in her internal organs strangely disappeared. She beamed with joy, her eyes full of bright colors. Thank you. The cold wind whistled past. Si Wuyen tightened the reins in his hand with a miserable and indifferent expression. He looked at her and said a few words. If there's an afterlife, don't believe in people like me. Chapter 122. When Gong Yimo heard this, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her heart. She couldn't bear it and spat out a mouthful of blood. Si Wuyen sneered as he looked at Gong Yimo's suddenly pale face. While he was laughing happily, his heart felt a slight pain. But without waiting for him to say anything, the horse under him suddenly neighed and charged forward crazily. The horse was frightened. Gong Yimo endured the sharp pain in her heart and wiped the blood from the side of her lips. She lowered her eyes and sighed softly. Didn't I tell you? That horse is afraid of blood. Ah. The wind whizzed past his ears. Si Wuyen crouched low on the horse's back as he tightly gripped the reins to prevent himself from being thrown off. Only then did he remember Gong Yimo's warning. He hated himself for lifting a rock and smashing his own foot. At this speed, if he was thrown off, even if he didn't die, he would be half dead. The surrounding scenery whizzed past and he had to think of a way to get down. Otherwise, if he continued forward and met Lu Ye's soldiers, he would definitely be shot to death. But, how was he going to get down? Si Wuyan's mind had countless ideas, but he rejected them one by one. His heart became more and more anxious as cold sweat seeped out of his forehead. Indeed, because he had committed too many sins, he would die a horrible death. In his panic, Si Wuyan's heart suddenly gave birth to this idea. His frightened heart suddenly felt a little tired. The wind whizzed past his face. He was a useless person. How was he going to get off the horse unscathed? Forget it. He didn't know who his Empress mother would appoint to replace him after he died. Only, he didn't know if that person would be as obedient and easy to control as him. Thinking of this, the hand that was tightly gripping the reins gradually loosened. But at this moment, a female voice was heard which made him feel refreshed. Do you want to die so badly? He frantically turned around. Indeed, it was Gong Yimo who had chased after him. The horse she was riding was obviously a rare and precious treasure. It was actually able to catch up with the frightened horse. But so what if she caught up with him? At this speed, he did not think that Gong Yimo could save him. In other words, it was too risky to save him. He did not think that Gong Yimo would do that. After all, he had wanted to kill her before. Gong Yimo caught up once again. Her face was pale, and it was obvious that she was enduring the pain. However, she was still smiling, as if everything was under her control. Don't say I didn't give you a chance. I'll count to 3. If you jump down, I'll definitely catch you. Her words made Si Wuyan laugh. At such a fast speed, he would definitely die if he jumped down. How could he catch it? She probably didn't know that even if her martial arts skills were high, she had been hit by his heart-burning powder. Once she used her internal energy, it would be like 10,000 arrows piercing her heart. Even an adult wouldn't be able to endure it, let alone a girl like her. 1. Her calm voice touched Si Wuyan's heart. At this moment, he suddenly regretted poisoning her. 2. Anyway, if he kept running like this, he would die. Dying with 10,000 arrows piercing his heart was too undignified. If he fell to his death, Gong Yimo would at least collect his corpse. Gong Yimo smiled. If you've heard about me, then you should know that I, Gong Yimo, never disappoint. Gong Yimo smiled. You've heard about me before, but you should know that I, Gong Yimo, never disappoint. Her words were like a shot of adrenaline that suddenly woke Si Wuyan up. 3. He should not have let go. He was clearly afraid of death. But when Gong Yimo said the word 3, he actually unconsciously let go of his hand. He clenched his teeth and jumped down. Then, he crashed into a warm embrace. But he was after all a grown man. The huge impact and weight caused Gong Yimo to deviate. She hugged Si Wuyan and rolled several times on the ground before coming to a stop. During this time, she protected Si Wuyan's vital points. He did not touch any of the gravel and jumped down from the crazy horse without a single injury. He got up in a panic and no longer pressed down on Gong Yimo. His eyes were filled with panic like a little beast. But Gong Yimo's situation was not so good. Her face was cut by a stone and there was not a single part of her body that wasn't in pain. She opened her mouth to curse, but spat out a mouthful of blood. Just now, when she used her internal energy, that feeling of 10,000 arrows piercing her heart. If it wasn't for the hellish pain in her past life, she would have lost her mind and Si Wuyan would have fallen to his death. But Si Wuyan, this bastard, did not warn her beforehand. He deserved to fall to his death. The sight of her vomiting blood pierced Si Wuyan's heart. He hurriedly touched his clothes and finally took out a pill to feed Gong Yimo with trembling hands. Gong Yimo smiled weakly and glanced at him. This time, there's no poison. Although she said that, she did not hesitate to take the pill in her mouth and swallowed it. Si Wuyan stood rooted to the ground in a daze. He didn't know if it was because of the shock or because of the warmth of her lips that came from his hand. He was in a daze and his brain seemed to have gone blank. He did not know what to do at all. Gong Yimo took the pill, closed her eyes and lay back down. She sighed, "I'm so tired. I'm dying." She dragged her words and raised her head and winked. "How was it? I wasn't wrong, right? Cough. I never disappoint anyone." She did not know why Si Wuyan's eyes turned red when he heard her words. He suddenly did not understand. What was all this for? Why did God let him meet Gong Yimo when he had already given up on humanity and lost all hope? If he had never met her, he might have continued to be twisted and believed that everything he did was right. His thoughts and actions were all correct. It was only natural that he would become like this. Rather than saying that he was wrong, it was better to say that the entire world was wrong. But after meeting her, it was as if all his past theories had been overturned. It was as if all his past thoughts were wrong, extreme, and narrow-minded. Being extreme was also a disguise for his own weakness and incompetence. There was actually someone like her in this world. No matter how others treated her, she would always act according to her heart. Even if she suffered, she would still be able to face life with a smile. But he had retreated from the beginning and became dark. His actions were actually worse than a woman's. Seeing that he did not speak for a long time, Gong Yimo took a deep breath and asked a little puzzledly. "May I ask, why did you feed me poison just now?" They were clearly chatting well and the atmosphere was harmonious, at least that was what she thought. Si Wuyan knelt on the ground and lowered his head. After a long time, he said, "People like you should not exist in this world." This world was obviously dirty and twisted. It did not need light at all. Gong Yimo was stunned. Without waiting for her to say anything, he suddenly looked up at Gong Yimo and said seriously and slowly, "I'm jealous that Gong Dai has such a good family like you. I don't, so he doesn't deserve to have you." Chapter 123. Gong Yimo was convinced. Was this a personality disorder? Forget it, let's not care about him. "Hey, I saved you. Shouldn't you give me some reward?" She had a treacherous smile on her face. Si Wuyan looked at her mischievous smile even though she was in a sorry state. He did not know why his heart, which was originally surging with anger, calmed down. He did not hate her. Instead, he wanted to laugh. "What do you want?" He thought that Gong Yimo would ask him to immediately cure the scorpion poison in her body. Who knew that Gong Yimo would say, "If I can only make one request, I want the elixir on your body that can regenerate muscles and bones." Her expression gradually turned serious. When Si Wuyan heard this, his expression gradually turned cold. He looked deeply at Gong Yimo, as if he wanted to see something from her small face. But in the end, he did not say anything. He still took out a jade box from his bosom. "What is this?" Si Wuyan said in a low voice, "This is the muscle revitalizing ointment that Imperial Mother personally concocted. It can revive the dead and regenerate flesh and bones." Gong Yimo's eyes lit up when she heard this. She hurriedly opened the box. The sparkling ointment exuded a kind of intoxicating smell. Just as Si Wuyan was about to get up, Gong Yimo suddenly used her hand to pick up a bit and smeared it on her injured face. Si Wuyan wanted to stop her, but it was too late. Once the ointment touched the wound, the bleeding immediately stopped, but a faint green color appeared. "Are you crazy?" Si Wuyan snatched the box back and somewhat panicked as he searched for something on his body. Gong Yimo was a little amused. Just how many things was this person hiding on his body? But this smile became fainter and fainter. Looking at his panic and the faint numbness on his face, she sighed softly. If you want others to trust you, first of all, you have to be worthy of their trust. Si Wuyen's hand paused. He glanced at her. His eyes were full of shock and somewhat evasive. Gong Yimo sat up and knelt on the ground. She stroked his head strenuously with a gentle expression. If you want people to care about you, you have to pay a price first. This is human nature. Perhaps people are selfish and cunning, but how many people are insatiably greedy? If you can only see the ugliness of human nature, then it will show you even more ugliness. But if you can see kindness, you will also discover how kind people can be. It was as if he was walking in a pitch-black night. His entire body was covered in scars from all the bumps and bruises. However, someone suddenly pushed open a window in front of him. What shone in was the sunlight that he longed for and was afraid to face. Si Wuyen didn't know how to describe his feelings at that moment. Not only was he shocked, but he also didn't know what to do. He could only find some medicine with a cold expression and apply it on her face. This time, the medicine he took out was placed in a wooden box. When he touched his face, he actually felt a pulling sensation. It was amazing. This must be the muscle revitalizing ointment. Si Wuyen hadn't finished applying it when Gong Yimo snatched it from his hands. She smiled evilly. This must be the muscle revitalizing ointment, right? She simply wanted to praise herself for being quick-witted. Si Wuyen looked at her with a complicated expression. He looked deeply at her and didn't say anything. In the end, he got up and prepared to leave. Where are you going? He looked down at a certain girl who didn't care about her image at all. Do you think the scorpion poison in your body is easy to get rid of? I don't have any suitable medicine on me. I have to go back and make another one. Gong Yimo smiled. After whistling, the horse she was sitting on just now galloped back. She pinched her sore muscles and looked at the wooden box in her hands. She couldn't help but think. Sigh, it really wasn't easy to trick him into giving her a box of medicine. When they returned to the city, Gong Dai was actually awake. Moreover, he had been waiting for her at the city gate with a cold expression. When he saw Gong Yimo, Gong Dai didn't even have time to smile before he was frightened by her sorry state. He glared fiercely at Si Wuyen who was sitting behind the horse. That gaze could almost kill. Gong Yimo was very happy to see Gong Dai. She jumped off the horse and ran in front of Gong Dai. She was a little worried. Do you still feel dizzy? Why did you suddenly run out? Gong Dai smiled at her, then took off his coat and draped it over Gong Yimo's body. It's so cold now. Why didn't you wear more when you went out? Gong Yimo smiled a little embarrassedly. Gong Dai cleaned the dried grass on her head with a helpless expression. Royal sister is a big girl now. Where did you roll around? Gong Yimo was too embarrassed to say that it wasn't just one round. She had rolled around more than 10 times. She pulled on his sleeve and acted coquettishly. Let's go back quickly. I'm so hungry. Gong Dai saw that she had purposely skipped this question. He looked at her helplessly. All right, let's go home. But when he turned around, his dark jade-like eyes coldly glanced at Si Wuyen who was still sitting on the horse behind him. If this person wasn't still useful, he would have cut him into pieces. Si Wuyen was 10 years older than Gong Dai. He replied with a cold smile. He knew that as long as Gong Yimo was around, Gong Dai wouldn't dare to do anything to him. He was fearless. During dinner, Gong Yimo met Jinshi of Gojoseon and his family for the first time. She was a little embarrassed. After all this time, she had troubled them so much but didn't have the chance to have a proper gathering. Jinshi of Gojoseon was already in his 50s. He had a son named Li Chongfeng, a daughter-in-law named Li Zhangshi, 2 grandsons, and a granddaughter. Then there was his princess consort, Li Ru. His family members weren't complicated at all, so it was easy to interact with them. However, Gong Yimo was very absent-minded throughout the meal. When the princess consort finally held her hand and finished nagging, Gong Yimo quickly took Gong Dai back to their room. Jinshi of Gojoseon couldn't stop smiling when he saw that the 2 children had a good relationship. However, he was a man after all, so he was careless. On the contrary, the princess consort was a little worried. These 2 children have a good relationship, she frowned slightly. After all, she was a lady from a noble family, so she still didn't agree. It's just that the princess and His Highness aren't young anymore. If they stay in the same room from time to time, I'm afraid it will affect their reputation. Jinshi of Gojoseon said loudly, "What are you afraid of?" Although they aren't biological siblings from the same mother, they have relied on each other for so many years. They are almost as close as real siblings. I'll see who dares to talk nonsense. The princess consort opened her mouth, but didn't say anything in the end. His Highness was a man, so he was too careless. When she thought about how His Highness reacted when the princess was in danger, it was reasonable to say that they had a deep relationship. However, it was just a meal just now. The princess wanted to eat fish, but His Highness had already removed the fish bones. Before she finished eating, His Highness scooped some soup to cool it down. Just as she finished drinking the soup, His Highness handed her a handkerchief. This really didn't seem like something her younger brother would do. It was more like... She paused and didn't dare to think too deeply about it. Gong Dai allowed Gong Yimo to pull him along. Looking at her lively appearance of being able to eat and jump, it was as if they had returned to a few years ago. However, the difference was that back then, they were in the palace and had to be careful with every step. Now that they were out, no one could control how they interacted with each other. Chapter 124. Royal Sister, what are you doing? Seeing Gong Yimo mysteriously close the door, Gong Dai was a bit nervous and couldn't help but ask. Gong Yimo hurriedly took out the muscle revitalizing ointment that she had swindled from Si Wuyan, her eyes sparkling. Dang 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 dang. Do you see this? Do you know what this is? This is the muscle revitalizing ointment personally made by the world's most powerful poison master. It can revive the dead and regrow flesh and bones. I spent a lot of effort to get it. Gong Dai had never heard of any sacred medicine with this name, but since Gong Yimo said it was good, then it was naturally good stuff. That's great, Royal Sister, the injury on your shoulder hasn't healed yet. Let me apply the ointment for you. Gong Yimo stared blankly for a moment, then immediately laughed. I have enough Yurong powder on me. It's just a small injury. This, I prepared it for you. She revealed a wicked smile. Quickly take off your pants and let Big Sister pamper you. The ambiguity in her words made Gong Dai's jade face turn red. If his confidants knew, they would probably be shocked again. Why was His Highness so different in front of the princess and in front of them? His heart was so tired. Reincarnation was indeed a skill. Seeing Gong Dai stunned and even blushing, Gong Yimo couldn't help but laugh. How did she raise this child to have such a shy and bashful appearance? Unfortunately, she didn't know that the child she was talking about was only like this in front of her. Gong Yimo saw that he wasn't moving, so she could only do it herself. She pushed Gong Dai to sit on the couch. Of course, she couldn't really take off his pants. Instead, she sat on the foot of the bed and carefully pulled up the top of his pants. She was awake and this was the first time she took the initiative. This knowledge made Gong Dai's face turn red and his heart beat faster. He sat on the bed and looked at Gong Dai who was crawling by his feet. He felt her carefully examining the wound and her warm breath on his leg. A sense of satisfaction arose spontaneously. Lowering his head to look at her long hair, his heart seemed to be slightly stirred by the ends of her hair. Itchy, but he didn't know where the itch came from. Thirsty, he didn't know what he was thirsting for. Gong Yimo carefully applied ointment to him. Her eyes were full of heartache. Why did she feel that she was always applying ointment to Gong Dai? She was so useless that she couldn't even take care of a child. Gong Yimo suddenly said seriously as she traced the shocking scar with her fingertips. I will remember that this place once lost a piece of flesh because of me. Gong Dai couldn't help but reach out to stroke her hair, his eyes filled with endless gentleness as he whispered, you don't have to remember this. Because everything I have is yours. That night, it was snowing lightly. There was no sound at all. A knock on the door woke Gong Yimo up. She opened her eyes in a daze and opened the door. To her surprise, it was Si Wuyan. It's so late. Why aren't you sleeping? Why are you scaring people? Dressed in red with disheveled hair in the middle of the night, she really didn't understand beauty. His expression was a little cold as he shook the 2 jugs of wine in his hand and said, going for a drink. Gong Yimo knew that he had something to say, so she pulled a thick cloak over her body and laughed. What are you waiting for? Let's go. Gong Yimo originally thought that he would find a beautiful pavilion to sit down and chat about the weather. Who knew that he would bring Gong Yimo directly to the market, because there were often spies from enemy countries in the western continent. Once they were caught, they would be executed here. So many people had died here in the past 10 years. There were stains on the execution platform that couldn't be wiped off. Moreover, these 2 lunatics were not sleeping at night and were drinking in this ghostly place in the snow. Gong Yimo wondered if she could leave first. Si Wuyan gave her a jug of wine and one for himself. She didn't know where he found it, but it tasted pretty good. He didn't speak and just drank sullenly, as if he had something on his mind. Gong Yimo couldn't help but recall that she seemed to have heard someone say that there was an unidentified flying pigeon in the afternoon. They asked her if she wanted to shoot it down. She guessed that it was looking for the plague in front of her, but she refused. As expected, he came to drink with her at night. You. How did you know my identity? He suddenly asked. Just as Gong Yimo was racking her brains to think of an excuse to get away with it, he smiled weakly. It's okay. Anyway, it's not a glorious identity. Gong Yimo didn't know how to respond. In her previous life, when her metal horse stepped into Yuchi, she discovered that this seemingly powerful country was internally divided. There was only one reason: this was a country where women were in power. Before she came, there were already a few revolts in Yuchi. Even when she fought her way to their doorstep, she didn't meet any decent resistance. In the end, the leader of Yuchi's largest rebel army, the original General Yuchi, directly handed her a letter of surrender. Thus, she easily fought her way to the Yuchi royal city. Along the way, she heard many rumors about Empress Dowager Yuchi, which was really shocking. Not only did this Empress Dowager poison the emperor to death, she also killed many of the emperor's sons. Later, she appointed her own son as the emperor. In the end, her son was impatient with her interference in politics and wanted to rebel. Many people supported him, but when someone leaked the information, she used bloody means to suppress it. After killing her own son, she appointed another son as the emperor. However, this son was more pitiful. He wasn't the Empress Dowager's biological son, but a prince raised under her name. Although he was taught by his adoptive mother and was said to be skilled in both medicine and poison, in order to prevent him from rebelling, the Empress Dowager crippled his meridians, causing his body to be weak and powerless for the rest of his life. Furthermore, the adopted son was extremely beautiful and was her pet boy. From this, one could see how pitiful this puppet emperor was. He was raised by the Empress Dowager and was her pet boy. The court officials were wary of him and the common people despised him. He didn't want to be manipulated by the Empress Dowager, but no one would help him, because they were afraid that this was a ploy by the Empress Dowager to test him. Gong Yimo admired this Empress Dowager very much and sympathized with this emperor. When the army broke into the Yuchi royal city, the Empress Dowager had already escaped with her trusted aides. The entire palace was emptied by the fleeing palace servants. Some even deliberately set fire to the palace, causing smoke and dust to fill the air. However, no one dared to approach the palace in the middle. Even if they wanted to burn this palace the most, and it clearly contained the most treasures, they only dared to stay far away from it. That palace was the Empress Dowager's secret dragon palace. A mere Empress Dowager actually lived in the secret dragon palace. When Gong Yimo stepped in, the palace was extremely intact. Pearls and agates could be seen everywhere, and they were called antiques. It was a completely different world from the mess outside. That was also the first and last time she saw Si Wuyen. Si Wuyen was dressed in bright red, sitting on the steps without a care for his image. He leaned over, his face exquisite as he drank mouthful after mouthful of wine. He didn't attack her, such as poisoning her. Chapter 126. Previously, the poison in the wine just happened to counter the scorpion poison in her body. It was fighting poison with poison, which was why it was so painful. What he fed her at the end was probably the poison cleansing pill that cleared away the remaining poison. At this moment, the inner energy in her body was flowing smoothly without any obstruction. From this, it could be seen that the medicine in his hands was indeed very good. However, she did not want to see this kind of unpredictable person again, alright? After lying down for a long time, someone suddenly walked to Gong Yimo's side. She raised her head and saw that it was actually Gong Dai. At this moment, he was wearing a black robe that almost blended into the night. Snowflakes floated on his body and landed on his slightly cold brows, making him look so desolate. "Why are you here?" She struggled to prop herself up. When Gong Dai saw this, he hurriedly stepped forward to help her up. He smiled faintly like a snow fairy, which was extremely moving. "Royal sister, are you all right?" Gong Yimo nodded. "I should be all right, but I'm a little tired." Only then did Gong Dai relax and directly carried Gong Yimo up by the waist. Gong Yimo was startled and then gradually relaxed. She just did not expect that her little brother had already grown into a handsome young man and could easily carry her like this. It did not feel strange anymore. Gong Dai indeed grew very quickly. He was handsome and tall, while Gong Yimo's height stopped at 1.68 meters. However, she was on the skinny side. Nestled in Gong Dai's arms like this, she really felt like a little bird that was dependent on him. Gong Yimo was indeed tired. She obediently laid in Gong Dai's arms until he carried her back and placed her on the warm bed. It was unknown who was so attentive, but the bed was warm. At a glance, it was obvious that someone had used a heater to warm it. Gong Yimo burrowed into the bed as soon as she touched it. Her lazy appearance made her look like a cat. Seeing her like this, even Gong Dai's brows were gentle. He also wanted to crawl under Gong Yimo's quilt, but he couldn't do that. He could only endure it and tuck her in. Gong Yimo was originally going to sleep. She was feeling unwell and very tired, but she suddenly thought of something. She grabbed Gong Dai's hand, slightly propped up her eyes, and asked carefully, "You? How did you know I was at the market today? Following me?" She didn't say the last few words. The smile on Gong Dai's face froze for a moment before he smiled again. "Someone said that you went out with him. I was worried, so I came out to take a look." Gong Yimo nodded, but her expression was still very conflicted. She seemed to have something to say, but she didn't know how to say it. Of course, she knew that under the support of Jinshi of Gojoseon, Gong Dai had trained many people, but it couldn't be what she was thinking. Seeing her frown, Gong Dai couldn't bear to see her frown. Royal sister, if you have something to say, just say it. He was always like this. In front of Gong Yimo, he would always be a well-behaved and good-tempered young man. Gong Yimo then smiled embarrassedly. That, you didn't send anyone to kill him, right? Her words made Gong Dai slightly stiffen. He looked at Gong Yimo with a deep gaze. He had disguised himself so well, so how could royal sister still guess what he would do? Gong Yimo immediately sat up when she saw his expression. Gong Dai must have sent people to kill Si Wuyen. She became anxious. Si Wuyen didn't have the strength to truss up a chicken, but if he really resisted, with his poison skills, wouldn't the people that Gong Dai had trained with great difficulty lose a lot? Can you let him go? Gong Yimo saw that Gong Dai was speaking very quickly, but Gong Dai didn't say anything. He only looked deeply at Gong Yimo. His expression was complicated and deep. After a long time, he finally smiled. However, this smile wasn't as obedient and gentle as usual. Instead, it was a little strange. In an instant, the aura around him changed completely. His appearance didn't change, but the feeling that he gave off was different. His eyes narrowed slightly, and the corners of his mouth lifted slightly. His eyes overflowed with an extremely dangerous light, causing the temperature in the room to drop immediately. You want me to let him go? His deep voice rubbed against Gong Yimo's ears. It was a rhetorical question, but it sent chills down her spine. Gong Yimo was stunned. She had never seen Gong Dai like this, but for some reason, when he smiled and asked her that question, even though his face was still young, it reminded Gong Yimo of Gong Dai's appearance when he was 30 years old in her previous life. At that time, he also smiled like this, and broke her fingers one by one. The memory that had been sealed away for a long time made Gong Yimo tremble. She looked at Gong Dai cautiously. She suddenly thought, so what if I raised him single-handedly? He's still that cold and heartless Gong Dai in his bones. If I suddenly asked him to let go of the prey that once threatened me, would Gong Dai retaliate? At the thought of retaliation, she couldn't help but recall the tragic death in her previous life. After so many years, she thought that she had already forgotten about it. She didn't expect that she could still remember it so clearly. The torture that was inflicted on her body, and his cold and smiling face, gradually overlapped with the Gong Dai in front of her. She slightly dodged and shrank back in fear. This instantly triggered Gong Dai's already furious heart. It was fine that she pleaded for mercy for someone who had hurt her. But now, she actually dared to be afraid of him. He approached her step by step. Gong Yimo originally wanted to retreat, but she held it in. She only opened her eyes wide and looked at him cautiously. Her heart suddenly started to pound. Her behavior simply made Gong Dai burn with anger. She was actually afraid of him. She was actually afraid of him. He knelt on the couch with one leg, leaned forward, and approached her. That cold gaze and that smile that contained anger seemed to be exactly the same as the god of death in her memory, but it also seemed to be different. But Gong Yimo didn't have time to distinguish. Layers of coldness swept over her, making her tremble all over. But she still held her breath and spoke softly. That person, he is also very pitiful, and he is still useful to me. Useful? But he hurt you. Gong Dai said with a smile, but his gaze was fixed on Gong Yimo. He was so close that Gong Yimo found it difficult to breathe. The space seemed to have narrowed down. She wanted to escape from Gong Dai's encirclement. As though he had sensed her intentions, Gong Dai used both his hands to support himself on both sides of her body, locking her firmly onto the bed. Gong Yimo finally panicked. She didn't know why Gong Dai, who had always been obedient, would suddenly become a different person. At that moment, Gong Yimo was lying beneath him. Their breathing intertwined, causing Gong Dai's heart to be in a mess. That evasive gaze made him want to ravage her crazily. But his heart was burning with anger. Everyone could be afraid of him, but why? How could the person he treasured be afraid of him? She was bullied like that, but she didn't allow him to kill that person. Why? Gong Dai's fingertips gently touched Gong Yimo's cheek. She trembled and didn't know what to do. Her subconscious action made Gong Dai even angrier. He raised his eyebrows and smiled coldly. Are you afraid of me? Chapter 127. He felt as if he had said a joke and laughed coldly. Then, he moved closer to her and looked at her with a gentle yet dangerous gaze. Why would you be afraid of me? I'm your most obedient brother. Gong Yimo took a breather from the tense atmosphere and looked at him seriously. If you're really obedient, then let me go and give the order to let him go. Gong Dai's eyes turned red when he heard that. Suddenly, he reached out and pinched Gong Yimo's face. His actions gave Gong Yimo a fright. She saw him tilting his head slightly and looking at her with a strange smile. Ha! Who is he to you? Is he worth you pleading for him again and again? That light tone made the hair on Gong Yimo's back stand up. But when she reacted, she was angered by his actions. Her face turned cold and she said sternly. Gong Dai. You better let me go. It had been a long time since he heard her call him by his name. Hearing it from her mouth, Gong Dai felt satisfied. No. You haven't answered me yet. He was extremely tough and did not allow her to refuse to suppress Gong Yimo. This kind of him really made her afraid. Gong Yimo pushed him and realized that he did not move at all. Unknowingly, Gong Dai's martial arts skills had already surpassed hers. Gong Dai's eyes were smiling, but his gaze was very dark as it swept across her body. That gaze seemed to have a penetrating power as it scraped across her body. Tell me. Why did you let him go? Why did you help him? Him too, Gong Che too. For the past year, why did you help Gong Che? The more he said, the more he could not maintain his smile. His voice suddenly rose, and there was anger in it as he questioned her. It turned out that this jealousy had been brewing in his heart for a long time. Every time he heard that she had done something for Gong Che, he wanted to kill her. Especially when they returned from the desolate Miasma Plains. When Gong Yimo was unconscious, he heard how Gong Yimo was forced, how she sacrificed herself for Gong Che, and how she faked her death to escape. He only felt like his heart was being burned in a pot of oil. He wanted to wake her up and ask her what Gong Che did to deserve this. He also wanted to rush to the capital and kill all those people. But when he saw her injured and unconscious, Gong Dai held back. He did not even mention it when she woke up. He thought he could hold it in, but he could not hold it in at all. Gong Yimo was his, she was his. No one else could touch her, not even the crown prince. Gong Yimo seemed to be panicking as she stared at him blankly. Once again, he sneered. Tell me. Why did you help him? Do you like him? Gong Dai. Gong Yimo suddenly shouted. Just when Gong Dai thought she would angrily resist and prepared an excuse, she suddenly cried. Her large eyes were filled with tears, but she fiercely glared at him and refused to let the tears fall. As soon as she cried, Gong Ju's boiling emotions seemed to have hit the pause button and disappeared. He blinked his eyes, suddenly at a loss of what to do. Gong Yimo's large eyes fiercely glared at Gong Dai with accusation. She pursed her lips and after a while, she could not stop crying and cursing. You have no conscience. Bastard. I instigated the crown prince to build the canal. It's true that I helped him, but I did it for you. She angrily wiped her tears with the back of her hand and angrily refused to look at him. I just want you to have more money in the future. I want to open our family's shops all over the country. Otherwise, do you think I lack money? If I lived alone and did not have to think about you, I would be living a carefree life. Why do I have to keep Siwuyan alive? He is Yuqi's puppet emperor. I am helping him today so that the trade between the 4 countries can have a good start in the future. He will be a good emperor for the country and the people. He will do his best to facilitate this. Didn't you say that you want to travel around in the future? The national defense is so strict now, how can that be possible? Once the 4 countries have trade relations, we will be able to travel around. But not only do you not believe me, you even questioned me. The more she said, the angrier she became. She only felt that she had raised an ingrate. In her previous life, he had tortured her to death, but she did not take revenge. Instead, she repaid evil with good, but he treated her like this. The more she thought about it, the more wronged she felt. Finally, her tears fell like a broken string of pearls. It's fine if you question me, but you also. You were fierce to me. Woo woo woo. Those tears were so hot that it seemed to burn his heart. Gong Dai quickly reached out to wipe them away. This time, it was like a flood breaking through a dam. Gong Yimo turned around, and with her back facing him, she laid on the bed and started to cry. This time, Gong Dai was completely flustered. Whether it was his previous coldness, dominance, or ruthlessness, they all disappeared. He had turned back into that clean, cold, and ignorant youth. His heart was in a mess, and he did not know what to do with the person he loved. Don't cry. I'm sorry, royal sister. It's my fault. Get out. I don't want to see you anymore. Go away. Woo woo woo. When she said that she did not want to see him anymore, he knew that she was saying it out of anger. However, Gong Dai could not help but feel a pain in his heart. His hands clenched into fists. I will send someone to call someone back now. Gong Yimo ignored him and continued to cry. Gong Dai had no choice but to make a hand gesture. Immediately, a person appeared and knelt on the ground. This person was specially trained by Jinshi of Gojoseon. Later on, he was sent to Gong Dai. He had been with him for the longest time. Now that he saw the princess crying, he did not dare to raise his head. He only lowered his head and waited for orders. Seeing that Gong Yimo was not embarrassed at all and continued to cry in the presence of outsiders, Gong Dai's heart ached and he sighed. Then, he stared coldly at him and ordered in a cold voice, "Call back the person you send out. Go now." At the end of his sentence, there was a hint of helplessness in his tone. When the person heard this, he hurriedly left. Gong Dai turned his head and saw Gong Yimo's shrugging shoulders. He frowned awkwardly and leaned over to softly fawn on her. "Royal sister. I've already done as you said. Please don't cry, okay?" He said it pitifully. His cold voice carried the unique grievance of a youth. Why was it that he was the one who was angry at the beginning, the one who was full of grievances, jealousy, and tolerance? But when Gong Yimo started crying, he had no way to fight back and could only give in. Although he thought this way, Gong Dai was still very willing to coax her. He was not impatient at all. Moreover, he patted her back and said some pleasing words at the same time. There was a hint of sweetness in his heart. Siblings would not be like this. They were like husband and wife when grandpa and grandma quarreled. Gong Dai patiently coaxed Gong Yimo for a long time. Only then did she raise her head while sobbing. Her eyes were red like a little rabbit's. She looked at him pitifully and asked, Then will you still be fierce to me in the future? I won't. I swear. How could he? She was his precious baby. He could not love her enough. Gong Yimo blinked. There were still tears in her eyes. She pouted and said proudly, then you can't not trust me in the future. No matter what I do, you have to understand and support me unconditionally. Her small appearance made Gong Ju want to hug her and kiss her red eyes. I promise you, I'll listen to you. Gong Dai was very close to her. In the end, he shamelessly started to act cute. Royal sister. Don't be angry with me. Don't ignore me. Chapter 128. He was simply too adorable when he acted cute. Gong Yimo couldn't help but want to laugh. She couldn't even hold it in. After a while, she managed to hold it in and protect the royal sister's authority. She snorted coldly and pouted. If there's a next time, I'll really ignore you. There won't be a next time, I swear. Seeing Gong Dai's serious expression and his handsome face tense, Gong Yimo couldn't help but laugh. Although there were still tears in her eyes, Gong Dai was smart enough not to mention this. The two of them made up again. This quarrel really came and went quickly. When Gong Dai came out of Gong Yimo's room, he was slightly relieved. He didn't know why he couldn't control himself just now and showed that side of himself to the royal sister. He clearly had always controlled himself very well, but now, he seemed to have lost control. Especially when he saw the royal sister being nice to others, he couldn't help it. It was already so late. Gong Dai didn't expect that the old princess consort was still awake. When she saw him come out, she faintly leaned against the door and looked at him. In order to hide Gong Yimo's identity, she had always said to others that she was the niece of the old princess consort's maternal family, so she was staying in her wing. Gong Dai was slightly stunned and smiled. Grandmother, it's so late. Why aren't you sleeping? Princess Consort Li Rushi forced a smile and glanced at Gong Yimo's room. I'm old and sleep less. When I heard some noise, I came out to take a look. Gong Dai saw that she didn't have a servant girl by her side, so he naturally wouldn't expose her lie. He smiled faintly and said, Grandmother, do you have something to say to me? The princess consort hesitated for a while before nodding. The snow tonight is beautiful. Your Highness wouldn't mind accompanying this old one for a walk in the plum garden behind the courtyard, right? Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and sized her up. He smiled faintly. Allow grandson to get an umbrella. Wang Fei nodded. She looked at Gong Dai's back as he calmly left and sighed. After Gong Dai ordered someone to guard Gong Yimo, he took out an umbrella. His intuition told him that what his grandmother wanted to say could not be heard by Gong Yimo, so he asked someone to guard her. Grandmother and granddaughter walked quietly like this. All the way to the plum garden, Wang Fei did not speak. Or rather, she was deep in thought about what to say. She looked at her grandson, who was already much taller than her. On one hand, she was amazed by how outstanding he was. If her daughter was in heaven and saw such an outstanding son, she would be very gratified. But on the other hand, he was worried. She had long heard that her grandson was raised single-handedly by the princess. However, the princess had never been a mother and was the same age as His Highness. In the end, there were still some things that she had not noticed. What plans does Your Highness have for the future? She opened her mouth and asked a seemingly unrelated question. Gong Dai smiled. Back to the capital. Wang Fei was slightly surprised. You're coming back. Gong Ju shook his head. I'm afraid she won't be back for a while. I've made a meritorious service, and now I'm back alive. Previously, I was delayed because of Sister Gong's injury. Now that she's recovered, I think she'll return to the capital soon. In fact, Gong Dai's original plan was to return to the capital after reporting on the completion of the mission. But Gong Yimou's injury changed his mind once again. Wang Fei thought for a while. Her face was tense, revealing the wrinkles at the side of her mouth. In that case, why don't we let the princess stay in the West Province? As soon as her words fell, Gong Ju's eyes turned to look at her, causing the rest of her words to be stuck in her throat. Seeing that he seemed to have frightened her, Gong Dai smiled again, but his smile was full of determination. Wherever I am, she will be there. His words caused the woman to stop. She stood in the snow with a grave expression. In a few days, Your Highness will be 13 years old, right? Gong Dai nodded. He hated himself for growing up too slowly. Wang Fei paused, looked at him, and asked softly, "Then does Your Highness know that Dai Yu State's ancient teachings say that when a man is 13 years old, he has to find a woman from an official's family and get married at 15? The smile on Gong Dai's face froze for a moment. He carefully looked at his grandmother, who had a grave expression on her face, and his heart trembled. That requires a mother. Gong Dai smiled bitterly. Moreover, it's not always like that. The Crown Prince is almost 18 years old now. Thinking of the Crown Prince's awkward situation, Wang Fei shook her head. His Highness was delayed before, but this time, the merit of building the canal is enough to secure his position in the Eastern Palace. Now that Her Majesty has been released, it won't be long before the Crown Prince gets married, and Your Highness. She was a little embarrassed, but she still said it. Now that your mother has passed away, this old bag of bones must find a woman for you. I wonder what kind of woman Your Highness likes. What kind of woman does he like? Gong Dai immediately thought of Gong Yimou's various quick-witted looks and smiled slowly. Grandmother, you don't have to worry. A man's ambition is to travel far. Now that I'm not settled, I don't dare to marry someone else. Not only did Wang Fei's words not comfort her, but she also frowned and said seriously. Your Highness must have read a lot of books and have a long-term vision. You don't care about these mundane things. Unfortunately, your grandmother's vision is shallow. I only read the necessary ethics, the book of poetry, the 3 principles, the 5 virtues, and the precepts for women. Her words were very clear. So Your Highness, please go ahead with your career. Let this old one worry about the trivial matters of the inner courtyard for you. Did she already see through his love for Gong Yimou? Was this a violation of the moral code? Was this a violation of basic ethics? Gong Dai narrowed his eyes. The coldness in his eyes was colder than the snowflakes. Wang Fei felt extremely uncomfortable under his gaze. She was even a little scared, but she still stood there resolutely. Was it against morals? Unfortunately, what to do? It was too late. Gong Dai smiled bitterly and shook his head. He retracted his cold aura and looked up at the sky. At this moment, he was dressed in black and stood in the snow. Beside him were plum blossoms. He really looked like a handsome young man who stood aloof from the world. Seeing that he didn't speak, Wang Fei was nervous, but she didn't dare to rush him. Grandmother, do you know what books I read when I was enlightened? After a long time, he finally spoke. Wang Fei frowned. She didn't really want to discuss books with him. After thinking for a while, she still replied. But, the 1,000-character classic. Wisdom and Wisdom. Gong Dai couldn't help but laugh and shake his head. His royal sister didn't read those things. Not only did she not read those, she didn't even read the precepts for women, and the analects of women. She did read them, but they were all relatively obscure books. He looked behind Wang Fei and seemed to be able to see the lively girl sleeping soundly. The corners of his mouth curled up again. The inadvertent gentleness in his eyes was enough to melt the winter snow. The first book I read was the Book of Changes. It was profound and difficult to understand, but Royal Sister didn't know. She even helped me find some books that she thought were useful for me to learn by myself. If I didn't know the words, I would ask her. She didn't know how to teach children. Later on, she always said that it was all thanks to my talent and intelligence. Speaking of this, he smiled faintly. His eyes were cold, but for some reason, they made people feel sweet. Later on, I read a lot of books, including Han Fizi, Shouyu, Swanjing, Etiquette, and so on. His eyes suddenly locked onto the princess consort. That sudden look in his eyes was so sharp that it made the 50-something-year-old princess consort's heart tremble. So, when I started to learn about ethics and saw Chang Tong, I was already 11. But at that time, his smile was like a blooming plum blossom. But at that time, it was already too late. Chapter 129. Ignoring the princess consort's shock, he stretched out his hand and a secret guard stepped forward and knelt at his feet. It's late. Help me send grandmother back to her room to rest, yes. But... The princess consort came back to her senses and her eyes widened. Her eyes were filled with disapproval. Her mouth opened and closed. Looking at her outstanding and cold grandson, she was speechless for a few times. Princess consort, please, the man in black carried out Gong Dai's instructions meticulously. Gong Dai also looked at her with a smile, but it did not reach his eyes. He looked a little cold as he bowed. It's getting late. I'll take my leave now. Grandmother, have a good rest. Then, he turned and left. His black robe blended into the night as if it could not be dispelled. But she, is your royal sister. Finally, the princess consort said it with great effort. After saying it, her face turned pale as if she could not believe it herself. She was born in a prestigious family and had read books since she was young. Her daughter was also well-educated and well-behaved. She thought that she had seen and experienced many things over the years, but she could not help but be shocked at this moment. The young man's leaving figure paused slightly. He tilted his head but did not turn around. From afar, it sounded like he was laughing and his voice was very joyful. But, I know she's royal sister. He turned around and continued walking. His eyes were as charming as a demon and his laughter was even louder in the wind. But, so what if she's royal sister? The princess consort's legs went weak and she almost fainted. The next day, Gong Dai bid farewell to Jinshi of Gojosian. After hearing his wife's words, Jinshi of Gojosian had a lot to say to Gong Dai. But Gong Dai was right. He had to return to the imperial city as soon as possible and could not delay any longer. Looking at the princess sitting by the side, he could not bring himself to say those words. Gong Dai was certain that even if they knew, they would not dare to speak carelessly. Therefore, Jinshi of Gojosian forced a smile and said, "In that case, I'll get the servants to prepare the caravan as soon as possible. We'll set off in the afternoon." Gong Dai bowed. "Thank you, grandfather." After the others left, Gong Yimo stuffed a pastry into her mouth and asked softly, "I think His Highness is right. As a dead person, I might as well stay here. Didn't you say that you want to stay here with me? Then you can find an excuse to come back after you return to the capital." It was originally like this. Gong Dai sat beside her, looked at her, and smiled faintly. His face became more and more handsome, and his smile was as beautiful as a snowflake blooming. "But I've changed my mind. Instead of hiding here, why don't we take advantage of the chaos in the capital and loot a burning house? Didn't royal sister say that? Risk and opportunity go hand in hand." "That's true." Gong Yimo's face was bitter. "But there are many people in the capital who know me. It's not good for me to go." Gong Dai held her hand and smiled. Royal sister only needs to stay by my side. If you really want to go out, can't you disguise yourself? Gong Yimo nodded reluctantly. Looking at Gong Yimo's reluctant expression, Gong Dai's heart ached. How could he not want to stay in Shi province for a few years before going back? No, as long as Gong Yimo was here, he could not go back. However, Gong Yimo's injury last time gave him a sense of crisis. If he did not have power, how could he protect the woman he loved? He could fight for it. No matter, he believed that he would not lose to anyone. As long as she was always by his side. That warm and sweet feeling swelled in Gong Dai's heart, but there was also some bitterness in it that made him feel helpless. Gong Dai's troops were temporarily left in Shi province, so there were not many carriages and horses. However, there were 1,000 imperial guards escorting them. Gong Dai and Gong Yimo sat in the same carriage. It was covered with thick cushions and was very soft. Even so, it was unavoidable for the carriage to be bumpy. Gong Yimo lifted the curtain and looked gloomily at the bumpy road. She felt the unusual vibration of the wooden wheels and thought indignantly that one day, she would change all of this. After 2 days of travel, Gong Dai's birthday arrived. Gong Dai did not know what happened that day. He only knew that Gong Yimo said that she wanted to get off the carriage to go sightseeing. It was clearly a rushed trip, but he pushed it back. Gong Yimo felt that it was very strange that the accompanying officials were so obedient to Gong Dai. However, this thought was only for a moment before she threw it to the back of her mind. They entered Hezhou City and were very lucky. As it was almost the new year, the streets were bustling with activity. Hezhou City is a desolate place, but there are so many people here. From the looks of it, they are doing well. It seems that the local governor is very capable. Gong Yimo nodded and then pulled Gong Dai along as she ran along the streets. Gong Dai did not know what she wanted to do. He kept a careful eye on her, afraid that she would be bumped into by others. She seemed to want to buy something. She picked and picked along the way, but she was not satisfied with anything. There was nothing on the streets that caught her eye. She thought for a while and bought 2 sticks of candied haws. She pulled Gong Dai to the only river in the city and sat by the river to rest. This river was called Bay. It was the source of life for Hezhou City. It was located in the west, and it was dry and lacked water. Therefore, people treasured this river. Every year during the new year, they would come here to light river lanterns to worship the river god. The sky gradually darkened. Looking at the lights on both sides of the river, the lively crowd, and the 2s and 3s of river lanterns in the lake, Gong Yimo only felt relaxed. Then, she passed a stick of candied haws to Gong Dai. Gong Dai was not a picky eater. Moreover, he liked sweets. Therefore, every time she bought sweets, she would not forget to give Gong Dai a portion. Gong Dai smiled but did not say anything. Gong Dai, after today, you will be 13. When Gong Dai heard this, he was slightly stunned. Actually, he had a good memory. How could he not remember his own birthday? He just did not care. However, he did not expect that Gong Yimo would insist on stopping her schedule to come out just to celebrate his birthday. If Gong Dai knew about this beforehand, he definitely would not have agreed to it. Therefore, Gong Yimo's action of acting first and asking later made him feel a different kind of warmth in his heart. Since he was young, Gong Yimo would always come up with something new on his birthday. Whether it was making exquisite pastries, a book that she had copied down that he had never read before, or taking him out at night to steal things and play pranks, she would always spare no effort to make him happy on that day. Then, she would force him to make a wish. As expected, after Gong Yimo said that sentence, she continued, "This year, there are no candles or birthday cakes. We are not particular people. Just make a wish to the river god. It will definitely come true. Gong Dai found it funny. Every time he made a wish, she would ask him to put his hands together and close his eyes. He felt that this was wrong and very childish, but he still did as he was told. Looking at the lanterns in the lake, his expression was gentle. He closed his eyes and made a wish. However, what Gong Yimo did not know was that ever since Gong Yimo appeared, his wish was the same every year. There was only one wish. If there is a God in heaven who listens to my prayers, I, Gong Dai, only wish that Gong Yimo alone can be with me, forever. Before he could finish making his wish, Gong Yimo hung something cold around his neck. Her warm breath blew into Gong Dai's ear, making him tremble as if he had been electrocuted. When he turned his head, he saw her smiling face that was so close to him. It was so beautiful that he wanted to swallow it whole. His Adam's apple bobbed. This is, Gong Yimo giggled and said, I looked for a long time and couldn't find anything suitable for you. This is the only thing that's not bad. It was a small compass. It was round, exquisite and beautiful. It was actually an ornament. Do you like it? This was one of the few things she had in stock. Gong Dai listened to her and smiled. Even if royal sister gave me a leaf, I would treasure it. Just like this candied hawthorn. He and Gong Che had probably inherited the emperor's dislike of sweets. However, every time, as long as Gong Yimo gave it to him, he would eat it without hesitation. Thus, everyone always thought that he loved sweets. If she loved him, then so be it. Because, he would become whatever she liked. Chapter 130. The carriages continued to move forward. This time, without Gong Yimo's interference, they moved very quickly. In less than 10 days, they reached the capital. She had not been out for long, but when she came back, she felt that everything had changed. Moreover, she did not know if it was her misperception, but she felt that everyone in the capital was in danger. There was no joy of celebrating the new year, instead, there was a sense of crisis. Gong Yimo looked for a while, then put down the curtain and closed her eyes in deep thought. After the carriages entered the city, because they were very low-key, they did not attract too much attention from the common people. Just like that, they went through the palace gates, while Gong Yimo stayed outside to wait. After Gong Yimo left, Gong Dai seemed to have changed into another person. He calmly and indifferently swept his gaze over the crowd. Wherever his gaze landed, everyone lowered their heads. Everyone was muttering in their hearts. The people they had met along the way were indeed an illusion. The current Gong Dai was the real him. Gong Dai did not seem to feel their fear, and smiled slightly. For this journey to the west, everyone has performed meritorious service. When I see Imperial Father later, I will report to him. When the people who came along heard this, they all expressed their loyalty and smiled fawningly. All of this is because of your Highness's guidance. We do not dare to claim the credit, we are all willing to follow your Highness to death. Only then did Gong Dai smile with satisfaction. His smile gave people an indescribable pressure. Those black jade-like eyes were like a ball of thick ink, revealing an endless threat. Don't worry, what you deserve, you will only get more. It was obviously a good thing, but everyone's heart trembled. Almost at the same time, they thought of the person who betrayed Gong Dai and wanted to inform the palace. He was tied behind a horse by Gong Dai, and then the horse galloped quickly. And that person was dragged for more than 10 li just like that. When they stopped, his body was already covered with wounds, revealing his white bones. He was only left with his last breath. And this was not the end. Gong Dai ordered people to hold a sky burial for that person in front of them. The scene was bloody and cruel, becoming a nightmare that they could not get rid of. Many of these people were spies planted by other people in the palace. However, over the past year, they had long been manipulated into submission by Gong Dai. Gong Dai was rich, very rich, and had given them many unexpected benefits. However, his methods were even more cruel. Anyone who offended him or betrayed him would face consequences that made them tremble in fear. Therefore, when the young man in front of them said that they would get more if they followed him, they didn't doubt it at all. However, they knew that if they betrayed him, they would end up worse than the others. Gong Dai waved his hand in annoyance, and they immediately quieted down. The convoy continued to move forward. On the palace road, they met another group of palanquins. From the looks of it, they were the private palanquins of the women of the officials' families. Su Miaolan originally had a lot on her mind, but after hearing the maidservant's report, she lifted the curtain to take a look. All she saw was a pitch-black carriage with a simple design that gave people a dignified feeling. It looked ordinary, but the 4 horses pulling the carriage were all rare horses. Her mind was like lightning, and she almost immediately guessed who the person was. When she thought of the 9th prince who had made a miraculous contribution in the West Province, her beautiful eyes moved. She ordered people to make way for her and helped her down the palanquin. Gong Dai was originally resting with his eyes closed when he suddenly heard a sweet female voice. The voice was low and gentle, but it was very seductive. He frowned slightly. He really didn't have the patience to deal with those insignificant people. However, when he heard her introduce herself as the legitimate daughter of the Jin country marquis, his fingers moved. Wasn't that the woman who wanted to bully the royal sister at the tea party? He opened his eyes, and a cold light seemed to flash through them. His snow-white slender hand lifted the curtain of the carriage, and someone immediately took over. His cold and exquisite appearance, which was like a splash ink painting, fell into Su Miaolan's eyes and shocked her. It had only been a year and a half, but the unremarkable prince of the past had actually become so elegant. Su Miaolan felt panic in her heart when she was glanced at by that pair of black jade-like eyes. She quickly bowed. "Your humble servant Su greets the 9th prince." Her voice was sweet like the sound of nature, and she displayed her most beautiful bearing in front of Gong Dai. She was glad that she was dressed very uniquely today, which accentuated her beauty. While she was bowing, she didn't forget to glance at him shyly. She seemed to be affectionate but reserved. If it was an ordinary youth, wouldn't they be moved? Gong Dai sat in the carriage and didn't move, nor did he call for her to get up. His cold and unique voice was slightly raised. "You are Su Miaolan." Su Miaolan's face turned pale. How could her maiden name be casually spoken by him? There were so many men present. Feeling Gong Dai's hostility towards her, Su Miaolan almost immediately thought of Gong Yimo. That's right, Gong Dai was brought up by Gong Yimo. Naturally, he would be somewhat dissatisfied with her. Thinking of this, her originally stunning good impression of Gong Dai faded a lot. However, she didn't forget that Gong Dai's return this time was a great merit. Therefore, she gritted her teeth and pitifully lowered her head. "Yes. Your humble servant's maiden name is Miaolan." Gong Dai picked up a strand of hair and gently twirled it around his fingertips. The corner of his mouth slightly hooked up, and his smile was somewhat malicious. "Let me guess. You entered the palace this time because the Empress summoned you." Su Miaolan was startled. She didn't know how the 9th prince, who had just returned to the capital, knew of her movements. She lowered her head and whispered yes. Her answer made Gong Dai happy. His original intention of punishing her suddenly faded because he thought of a wonderful game. He looked down at the other party's weak body that was shivering in the cold wind and said in a low voice, "Raise your head." That cold and dignified voice made Su Miaolan feel danger. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt a little afraid of this prince who was 3 years younger than her. Hearing this, she hurriedly raised her head. However, she originally wanted to show a flattering smile, but because of fear, her entire face looked very stiff. Gong Dai glanced at her and leaned back as if it hurt his eyes. However, a trace of a sneer appeared on his lips. The capital's #1 beauty. His voice was full of disdain, and it was clearly transmitted to everyone's ears. She's only a so-so, Bai Xing, let's go. Yes, Your Highness. Bai Xing looked at Su Miaolan with some sympathy. She had offended the princess, but was lightly let off by His Highness. Then, what awaited her would definitely be an even more terrible punishment. However, Su Miaolan almost ground her teeth to pieces because of this sentence. What did she care about the most? Other than her identity, it was her face. However, this damned Gong Dai actually said that she was only a so-so. It was as if he had torn her clothes in front of everyone. She felt so wrong that she only wanted to cry. However, a raging flame ignited in her heart. Extremely unwilling, she glared at the carriage that had gone far away before she was helped up by the maidservant beside her. It was only because she was only 13 and didn't know the ways of men and women. Just wait. In the future, she would definitely make Gong Dai fall under her skirt. Chapter 131. Emperor Gong was a little impatient. He didn't know why, but during this period of time, the imperial court was turbulent. None of the princes and ministers were easy to deal with. Fortunately, the crown prince was a good person. During his recuperation period, he still shared his worries. Moreover, this once disliked ninth son had quietly made such a great contribution. So when he heard that Gong Dai had returned, Emperor Gong smiled for the first time. He was looking forward to seeing his son. He sighed in his heart. Gong Yimo really has a good eye. Her elder brother and younger brother were all good. Unfortunately, Emperor Gong couldn't help but sigh when he thought of Gong Yimo. He hadn't found Gong Yimo's body and had been worried about it. Although he heard some suspected news about Gong Yimo from time to time, every time he searched, he found that it was fake. At this time, Gong Dai came. Because it wasn't time for the imperial court, Emperor Gong met him privately in Zhaoyang Hall. Seeing that Gong Dai had grown into a teenager, he sighed slightly. His children had grown up, and he was also old. He first wantonly praised Gong Dai, then asked cautiously. About Imo, You've heard about it, right? Hearing this, Gong Dai's face showed a trace of grief. Then he firmly said, this son firmly believes that royal sister will not die. His words made Emperor Gong's heart sour. This matter, it's imperial father's fault, don't blame imperial father. Gong Dai suddenly interrupted him. His pair of ink-black eyes fixed on Emperor Gong. Finally, he closed his eyes and said, I know royal sister's thoughts. If royal sister was here, she would certainly understand you. So, I also understand. Good. Emperor Gong was quite moved. He felt as if the knot in his heart was untied. You really are a child who grew up with her. You're also a good child. Gong Dai lowered his head and didn't speak. Emperor Gong felt that Gong Dai's heart was still full of resentment and pain. Thinking of this, he felt very guilty and secretly made a decision. When he bestowed rewards tomorrow, he had to give Gong Dai more compensation. So he didn't continue this topic and just comforted her gently. She will appear one day. You, go and rest first. As he spoke, his voice became louder. He patted his shoulder and laughed. You have made a great contribution this time. I will reward you well. Tomorrow morning will be the day of your rise. Gong Dai forced a smile. Yes, thank you, Imperial Father. He talked to the Emperor for a while and then presented the gift he had prepared. The emperor was very pleased and let him leave early. In fact, the emperor should be glad. If he hadn't been in the barren miasma plain when the news of the royal sister's death came, he would have gone crazy. Fortunately, Gong Emo had arrived in advance, and had unknowingly saved a catastrophe. Out of Xiaoyang Hall, Gong Dai didn't want to stay a second longer. He wanted to leave the palace, but he couldn't. He had to stay in the palace tonight. Not only did he have a lot of things to hand over, but he also had to record the details of the process. So even if he was anxious to return home, he could only endure. But he didn't expect that someone was more anxious than him. As soon as he left Xiaoyang Hall, he was stopped. Gong Chei's gaze carefully circled around the four people behind Gong Dai. Then he regretfully withdrew his gaze. He naturally knew that Gong Yimo wouldn't enter the palace at this time, but he still had some hope in his heart. Long time no see. Ninth brother, how have you been? Gong Chei had recovered his spirit. Although he still looked very weak, his smile was very gentle. But if one looked carefully, one would only feel that the smile didn't reach the bottom of his eyes. Gong Dai keenly felt a thread of hostility. He narrowed his eyes slightly and smiled again. He was devilishly handsome, and when he smiled, he was even more handsome. This made Gong Chei slightly jealous. He heard that young girls liked beautiful people. If Emo stayed by his side for a long time, what would happen if she was enchanted by Gong Dai's appearance? Because he loved Gong Yimo, he thought that the entire world would fight with him. Gong Dai naturally became his imaginary enemy. But he didn't think that he would hit the nail on the head. Greetings, Crown Prince. I have to go pay respects to Imperial Grandmother, so I won't accompany you any longer. Gong Chei said calmly, no problem. I also have to go to Imperial Grandmother to talk about Fu Wang's birthday. Let's go together. Since he said so, Gong Dai naturally wouldn't refuse. But he looked at Gong Chei and smiled even more strangely. The two's gazes met. It looked calm and without ripples, but the attendants on both sides felt the undercurrent. They all lowered their heads and didn't dare to speak. In the end, they silently dismissed their attendants and walked together towards Heshi Palace where the Empress Dowager lived. One of them was calm, the other was cold, but they both had their own charm. When they walked together, it was instantly eye-catching. Gong Dai keenly felt that something was wrong. The people in the palace respected Gong Chei very much, and even feared him. And in the past, Gong Chei was famous in the palace for being a good person. He was easy to talk to, and the people in the palace were not afraid of him. But now, it seemed that it had changed. Gong Chei also sighed in his heart. Gong Dai was so young, but he had made such a contribution. After tomorrow, he was afraid that everyone in the capital would know of his outstanding character. Gong Chei wasn't afraid that he would overshadow him, but, in Gong Yimo's eyes, he wanted to be the best. Thinking of his beloved, Gong Chei couldn't help but smile. He finally asked, Amour, is she well? Gong Ju clenched his fists tightly at Gong Chei's affectionate greeting. In an instant, Gong Ju's body erupted with murderous intent, making Gong Chei feel cold. After a long time, Gong Ju sneered. What does her well have to do with you? When Gong Chei heard about Gong Yimo, he didn't have the mind to care about his disrespect. His eyes lit up and he blurted out. Then where is she now? In the capital. Gong Dai looked at Gong Chei's excited expression and couldn't help but mock. Do you have the right to see her? In this year, she did so much for you. In the end, she was even forced to commit suicide by the emperor for you. What did you do? What right do you have to see her? His words were merciless, making Gong Chei stunned. Gong Dai lowered his eyes and turned the jade ring on his finger, coldly saying. Since you can't protect her, I ask Crown Prince not to bring trouble to her. After all, she has something that everyone wants in her hands. For this thing, she was forced to use the death escape technique to escape. There are so many eyes around you. If you go see her, it will only make her situation more dangerous. If I were you, I wouldn't do that. After Gong Dai finished speaking, he didn't even look at him and walked away, leaving Gong Che standing there in a daze, as if he couldn't come back to his senses. Gong Dai was right. It was him who thought too simply. If he went to see her so rashly, her death escape technique would be useless. Imperial father and other brothers, for the sake of ambition, they would skin her alive. Chapter 132. Gong Che clenched his fists tightly. Even though he was under the bright sun, he felt cold. A chill rushed to his head, making him feel as if he was in a cold lake and unable to breathe. But he just wanted to see her. He had been looking forward to Gong Dai's return day after day. Wasn't it just to see her? Now that the beauty was in the capital, he couldn't even see her. Others couldn't understand this heart-wrenching pain. Gong Dai saw that Gong Che didn't follow him, and a trace of ruthlessness flashed through his eyes. If only he could make Gong Che disappear unknowingly. In this world, anyone who fought with him for the royal sister deserved to be killed by him. But when he thought of Su Miaolon, he was relieved. He would do his best to make this happen. Because he knew very well that the royal sister wouldn't accept any kind of man. What the royal sister wanted was monogamy. When he thought of Gong Yimo, Gong Dai felt sweet again and went to Heshi Palace. The Empress Dowager had been worshipping Buddha all year round and didn't care about worldly affairs, so Gong Dai originally thought that he was just going through the motions. But after he finished speaking, the Empress Dowager didn't seem to have any intention of letting him leave. Gong Dai secretly frowned. He didn't want to stay here for too long. Gong Che was called to Feng Chi Palace by the Empress's people in a daze. He had a bad premonition in his heart, but he still went. During this time, Empress Liu was a little afraid of her son. Gong Che seemed to have transformed overnight. He used to be kind and benevolent, but now, in just over a month, he had used the Emperor's hand to eradicate many people. And he even coaxed the Emperor to feel guilty. His intelligence and methods were much better than before. Sometimes, the Empress felt that she didn't know this son anymore. However, the benefits were also obvious. Because the Eastern Palace was stable, even her status had risen along with it. The matters of the harem were gradually becoming easier to handle. Although she was still a little busy, her life was much better than before. Upon seeing Gong Che, the Empress revealed a smile. Recently, she had experienced many happy events, and her entire face was glowing. Moreover, the Emperor had also come several times. This made her, who was already in her 40s, have a faint hint of spring on her brows. Gong Che handed the fur coat to a palace servant and walked over. Seeing the Empress' appearance, he sighed in his heart. For a woman, no matter how much status, wealth, or children she had, it still couldn't compare to her husband's pity. He was still as gentle as before. His handsome face had a smile that made people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze, making people feel good about him. Imperial Mother, why are you looking for me so urgently? The Empress smiled faintly and pulled him to the table. On the table, there was a mountain of files. Gong Che looked at them and found that they were all files introducing the women of the court. He squinted his eyes, but Empress Liu didn't notice. She only thought about the past and smiled bitterly. Che, you should have chosen a concubine long ago, but before, she paused and shook her head, don't mention it. Now that you are about to leave the capital and go to Huai River, before you go, you should settle the marriage. When you return to the capital, you can hold the wedding ceremony. It's a double blessing. The Empress's words left Gong Che rooted to the ground. He stared at the dossiers as though they would all disappear just like that. He didn't want to get married. Or rather, the person he wanted to marry wouldn't even appear on the list of concubines. Seeing that he didn't speak, the Empress thought of something. Her eyes flashed and she said with a smile. Now, you're almost 18 years old. Your brothers are all married at 15 to 60% of the time, and your sixth brother already has 2 children. The imperial family places great importance on heirs. You must make plans early. As she said that, she showed him the files on the top of the pile. These women are all daughters of aristocratic families of the right age. Not to mention their strong background, their appearance and temperament are all outstanding. For example, Su Miaolan. At this time, Gong Che finally found his voice. He forced a smile. Imperial Mother, let's talk about this after I finish building the canal. Empress Lu glared at him. It will be at least 2 years later when you finish building the tributary. If these women don't settle down early, where will Imperial Mother find the right person for you? As she said that, she raised her eyebrows and asked with a strange expression, or, do you already have someone you like? Gong Che couldn't answer her question. Smoke filled the room. Gong Dai hated the strong smell of sandalwood. He glanced at the bodhisattvas in the temple hall and sneered in his heart. He had done too many guilty things. No matter how many bodhisattvas there were, they couldn't make him feel at ease. There was no sound from behind the curtain for a long time. Gong Dai narrowed his eyes slightly. He didn't know what trick the Empress Dowager was playing. At this time, the royal sister must still be lazing in bed. He didn't know if Bai Xing had woken her up for dinner, but Bai Xing was also useless. He was definitely not the royal sister's opponent. At this time, a low cough was heard. Gong Dai quickly focused his mind. He heard the sound of the curtain and an old woman walked out of the dark temple hall. The Empress Dowager was not yet 60 years old. He didn't know if she was too worried. Her well-maintained face was actually accompanied by a head of silver hair. She was supported by people. When she saw Gong Dai, she smiled lovingly. My grandson, you have grown so big. Come here, let me have a good look at you. Gong Ju walked over steadily. The Empress Dowager looked at him with a pair of shrewd eyes. The more she looked at him, the more satisfied she became. She praised him and pulled him to the side hall where the guests were received. After ordering the servants to serve the best tea, she let go of Gong Dai and smiled. Now that you are a big child, did you encounter anything interesting during this year's journey to the west? Gong Dai was too lazy to talk more. He just coldly replied. Grandson went to provide relief. I didn't encounter anything interesting. His words made the Empress Dowager's smile slightly stiff. She looked at Gong Dai deeply and smiled. So, you didn't meet any girl you like? Gong Dai's mind was like lightning. He almost immediately understood what she wanted to do. The Empress Dowager was Lu Xianfei's aunt. She wanted to pull him to Lu Xianfei's side after seeing him gradually gaining power and making a great contribution. Without waiting for Gong Dai to speak, the Empress Dowager said. Now that you are not young, it is time to find a wife. Pity, you don't have a mother to take care of things for you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be so passive. Gong Dai naturally wouldn't let her go on like this. He quickly said. Grandson is still young. I don't know much about love. I just want to share father's worries and contribute to the Daiyu state. His resistance once again made the Empress Dowager a little unhappy. She squeezed the prayer beads in her hand and sneered. If you haven't experienced it, you won't be able to taste the good. It just so happens that Aijia has a little niece. She is virtuous and has a good appearance. Her family background is worthy of the imperial family. In Aijia's heart, the one I miss most is you. She said so. Gong Dai didn't know what was good for him if he refused again. He looked up and fixed his eyes on the Empress Dowager. Suddenly, he smiled. This smile made the originally low-key and luxurious side hall suddenly dim. The Empress Dowager's heart skipped a beat. Since grandmother is so kind, would you allow grandson to see? Chapter 134. The Empress was rooted to the spot by his words. When he talked about grief, there was no pain. When he talked about Gong Yimo, he was full of sweetness. When he talked about loving her, the joy in his eyes could almost infect her. Her son really loved Gong Yimo to the bone. She could only hate. She had sensed it a long time ago, but she did not stop Gong Che when he left the capital. Perhaps it was useless for her to stop him at that time. Some feelings were buried deep in the heart inadvertently. So it was often too late when she realized it. The Empress could not speak for a long time. In the end, she could not help but cry. No matter how much Gong Che liked Gong Yimo, she was still his sister. As the crown prince, her son was the role model of the world. One wrong step and he would be doomed eternally. He would never be able to make a comeback. Seeing the Empress cry, Gong Che felt a little guilty. He was a filial person and could not bear to see the Empress cry because of him. However, he had no other choice. The entire Feng Qi palace could only hear the Empress sobbing in a low voice. Her grief was endless. The originally hot palace had an indescribable desolation. But she's your sister. Your feelings are not tolerated by the secular world. The Empress said this while crying. She really did not want to see her son walk on the road to death. She wanted to help him. Gong Che's face was filled with grief. He lowered his head to look at his hands as he muttered to himself. But I can't control it anymore. Mother. Hearing this, the Empress closed her eyes and did not want to look at him. If now he knew that Gong Yimo was not the Emperor's biological daughter, it would only make things worse. So she could not say it. She could not let Gong Che know about this. Moreover, maybe her son was so affectionate because he had never been with other women. Maybe once he got married, those feelings would fade away. Even if there was only a 1 in a million chance. Thinking of this, the Empress's will became firmer. She could not let things go on like this. She had to find a way to stop it. And the best way was to let Gong Che get married. Now, the only thing left was to find a way to convince him. Thinking of this, the Empress finally stopped crying. Instead, she calmly wiped away her tears bit by bit. Looking at her son who was still upset, a trace of grief flashed in her eyes. Che. Do you want to be with Gong Yimo? Gong Che smiled bitterly when he heard this. How could he not want to? He wanted to even in his dreams. But he really didn't know how to fulfill this wish. As long as it could be fulfilled, he was willing to do anything. At this moment, the Empress's voice gradually lowered. If you want to get her now, not only will you be maliciously slandered by the other princes, you might even be dragged down from your position in the Eastern Palace. You will also have to think of a way to shut the mouths of the wandering masses. Thus, it is impossible to be together with her now. Her words made Gong Che's eyes dim. How could he not know that once he did something, the prejudice of the world would consign Gong Yimo to eternal damnation? But the Empress's eyes flashed. In this world, there is only one person who can do whatever he wants. No one will dare to touch his reverse scale, and no one will question him. Her words were like a shot in the arm, making Gong Che's heart tremble. He looked at the Empress in astonishment. The Empress had already fallen into some kind of crazy mood. She suppressed her emotions and slowly said word by word. If you become the Emperor, then you will be the one who has the most right to speak. When the time comes, you can directly change Gong Yimo's identity to enter the palace. The people won't understand, and the ministers, who would dare to say anything against the emperor. Only when you become the emperor. Then you can have everything you want. Her words immediately pointed Gong Che in the right direction. It even made his heart burn with eagerness. The Empress's eyes flashed, and becoming the emperor, is it such an easy thing? She smiled coldly. Let's not talk about Lu Xianfei and Long Guifei's son. How many of the other princes are easy to deal with? Now you are not willing to marry, and have no children. If one day Gong Yimo appears in front of people again, and your feelings are discovered, then what is waiting for you is eternal damnation. Mother. Gong Che knelt down and stubbornly raised his head. This son does not want to marry. This son does not want anyone except Gong Yimo. The Empress sat on the phoenix throne. That luxurious phoenix crown reflected a cold and elegant edge. She looked down at him and sneered. But now you don't want to marry, but slowly develop. How long will it take for you to become the emperor? You can afford to wait, but will Gong Yimo wait for you? Her words made Gong Che speechless. Gong Yimo will not wait for him, because she doesn't know his feelings for her. Knowing this, the Empress timely said, and will Gong Yimo accept you? You now are just wishful thinking. If she does not accept you, are you willing to give her up like this? No. I will not give up. But without power, how can you not give up? You must know that behind her is Gong Dai, who is gradually rising. With his personality of treating his sister like his own life, if you don't have the right, how can you snatch her away? The Empress was indeed from the harem, and she knew her son very well. Every word and sentence seemed to hit his eardrums, making him uneasy and uneasy. Seeing that the effect has been achieved, she finally said the key sentence. Think about it carefully. Do you want to quickly marry and become the emperor step by step, or do you want to scheme bitterly and see Gong Yimo marry someone else? You choose. After that, she no longer looked at Gong Che and got up to leave. But her heart was very firm. My son, don't blame your mother for being ruthless. Mother is also thinking for you. If your feelings for Gong Yimo are stronger than gold, then sit on the emperor's throne for me to see. Gong Che's originally wavering heart inexplicably made a decision after the morning court the next day. Because Gong Dai was bestowed the title of prince in advance. He was not an idle prince, but a prince with real power. Not only did he have a fief, the emperor also gave him 50,000 soldiers. It was equivalent to entrusting half of the imperial city's safety to him. For a moment, there was no other glory. The emperor also gave him a prince's mansion. This made Gong Dai the happiest. Because he finally had a home that he and Gong Yimo formed together. So after leaving the palace, Gong Dai eagerly took Gong Yimo to see their new house. That happy expression was a joy that the subordinate had never seen before. Gong Yimo also felt very happy. Because she could decorate her room to her heart's content. She immediately chose a courtyard and shamelessly took it. The courtyard was very remote, but there was a hot spring. This was a pleasant surprise. Gong Dai looked at the hot spring surrounded by flowers and smiled slyly. In the future, when I'm tired, I will also come and soak in it. Royal sister can't refuse. Gong Yimo was patrolling the room. Hearing this, she did not turn her head and said, "It's okay, you can come tonight." Chapter 135. The fact that Gong Yimo agreed so readily made Gong Dai a little stunned. Once he thought of soaking in the hot spring with Gong Yimo, for some reason, he felt a little lightheaded, as if he had drunk too much. His royal sister was really sent by the heavens to torment him. Gong Dai's subordinates were very efficient. In the afternoon, Gong Yimo lay by the side of the hot spring in the courtyard and ate some snacks. As she ate, she counted on her fingers to calculate what she had to do next. In the end, she found that there was no rush, so she felt a little lazy and didn't want to move. At this time, Xian lifted the curtain and walked over. When Gong Yimo was demoted, Xian happened to be of age, so she was released. For some reason, she was found by Gong Dai and stayed to serve Gong Yimo. "Princess, it's so late. His Highness must have a banquet tonight, so why don't we wait?" She looked very small with a tender face. She was already 18 years old, but she still had an introverted and timid appearance. Gong Yimo rubbed her stomach and laid on the chair without moving. Her eyes were lifeless as she looked at the sky. "Don't mind me, I can sleep on this chair until I die." Seeing her boneless appearance, Xian really couldn't imagine the princess's high-spirited appearance when she confronted the emperor alone more than a month ago. If those students were to know about this, in the princess's words, wouldn't that be disillusionment? "Then do you still want to eat?" She was just asking out of procedure. As expected, Gong Yimo waved her hand and said, "Go find me a wooden tray. And some wine. I want to soak in the hot spring." Xian couldn't do anything about it, so she could only do as she was told. By the time she was ready, Gong Yimo had already stripped naked and entered the hot spring. The dense steam filled the air, steaming her little face pink and tender. She lazily opened her eyes and lay by the side of the pool to watch Xian's movements, smiling fawningly. "Good Xian, why don't you come down and join us?" She looked at Xian's good figure with perverted eyes. Her fingers itched. If only she had a D cup, she would play with her own. That feeling, it was simply. This vulgar thought was rejected by Xian. She whispered, "How is this something that servants like us can enjoy? My little princess, please spare this servant. If His Highness were to see this." Xian shivered. She didn't dare to imagine it. After being rejected, Gong Yimo felt a little wronged. She pitifully held her wine glass and poured herself some wine. She placed the tray in the water. There were fruits and wine on the tray, and they moved along with the water. She sat on a naturally formed rock in the water. Everything below her chest was not in the water, so she did not feel cold at all. Xian was waiting by the side, wearing thick clothes. At this moment, she suddenly raised her head and said happily, "Princess, it's snowing." She was a little excited. "This is the first snow in the capital." Gong Yimo opened her eyes and looked up, only to see countless white snowflakes drifting down from the pitch-black night sky. Under the illumination of the lights in the courtyard, there was a kind of silent beauty. Gong Yimo reached out to receive it, but the water vapor filled the air. Before the snow could land on her body, it melted. She sighed. This is the life that a person should live. She thought of the various things in her previous life. She experienced the picturesque landscape, and also saw the rivers and mountains dyed with blood. She achieved the highest position, but also became a prisoner on death row. Her short life was too rushed. She didn't know what kind of state of mind other people would have if they were reborn. Would they pursue the highest position? Or would they want revenge and trample on all those who bullied her? That was too tiring. It was already hard to live. If she continued to torment herself, it would only make her life more difficult. A human life was so fragile. It would die just like that. What was the point of scheming all day long? She couldn't eat well or sleep well. It was better to do as she pleased. If there was a problem, it would be solved. If there was no problem, everything would be fine. This was life. Gong Yimo thought, and happily drank a mouthful of wine. For example, last year's pear blossom wine. There was only so much produced in a year. She was so lucky to be able to drink it. After drinking, she raised her head and ordered in a very domineering tone, "Xin, why aren't you coming over to wipe my back?" Xin smiled and responded. She quickly knelt by the pool and wiped her back. When she was with the princess, she had a feeling that she wanted to tell her everything in her heart. In the past, she didn't understand. Later on, when she grew up, she understood why. It was because the princess was broad-minded. Her vision had long been beyond the reach of ordinary people. Therefore, she didn't fuss over things and didn't guard against others. She did things according to her heart. It could be said that she had returned to the beginning. And the beginning of a person wasn't kindness. The princess was a kind person. Xin was very glad that she was able to meet Gong Yimo. By her side, she seemed to have become a version of herself that she liked even more. Gong Yimo was completely unaware of Xin's thoughts. She hugged the tray and ate and drank while enjoying Xin's service. From time to time, she would turn her hand over to give Xin some food. That extremely happy little appearance made her completely forget that she hadn't gone to report to Gong Che that she was safe. She had promised Shin Shiyi to treat her to a meal but hadn't done so. There were also some miscellaneous matters that had been thrown to the back of her mind. If she continued like this, wouldn't she degenerate? Gong Yimo thought in a daze. She picked up a piece of fruit and sent it behind her. Xin, do you think the emperor is going to hold a banquet tomorrow to celebrate Gong Dai's success? Feeling that the person behind her directly took the fruit away with her mouth, Gong Yimo was a little surprised. However, she still continued to talk to herself. I really want to go and play. It's too boring to be alone. And at that time, there will definitely be a lot of women. It seems like it's time to find a woman for Gong Dai. Evil old society, but we still have to go with the flow. It seems like it's also very fun. Royal sister, do you really want me to marry a wife? A cold and unique voice suddenly sounded. Gong Yimo turned around abruptly and saw Gong Dai's somewhat aggrieved expression. It was as if she didn't want him anymore. Gong Yimo was caught red-handed. She secretly hated Xin for not being helpful. She softly fawned, how could I not want you? Speaking of which, it's still dinner time. You've been busy attending banquets these past few days. Why did you come back so early? Because I missed you. Gong Dai scooped up a strand of her hair from the water and played with it. He smiled mysteriously and said, because those people are really too boring. At this moment, he was half lying on the edge of the water, his black robe and long hair falling into the water. The black color and his jade-like skin formed a soul-stirring contrast. His jade-like eyes were cold and clear as he looked over. His entire person was like a splash of ink painting, beautiful and full of charm. The dense water vapor evaporated. It made him even more beautiful than a mortal. Gong Yimo couldn't help but gulp. After a while, she finally recalled what he had just said. Boring is good. Boring is good. She drank some wine and was already captivated by this beauty. She didn't know what she was saying anymore. Gong Dai was secretly amused. He propped up his chin with one hand and opened up his chest. As he moved, the originally loose belt loosened even more. The collar was pulled open, revealing his exquisite collarbone. Chapter 136. At this moment, he had just grown up. He was not as young and tender as he was when he was young, nor was he as handsome as he was later. He was in between youth and maturity. He was slender and well-proportioned, slender but strong. It could be said that a little more would be too much and too little. That pair of black jade-like eyes glanced sideways. They were cold and indifferent, but they could easily make people shudder. Gong Yimo suddenly understood why in her previous life, Gong Dai was notorious and his methods were so ruthless that it made people's hair stand on end. Even so, there were still so many women who wanted to enter his harem. It was enough just to look at this evildoer's appearance. If she could see his slightly cold eyes dyed with lust and go crazy for her. Just thinking about it was a kind of satisfaction. Gong Yimo quickly shook her head. What nonsense was she thinking? Seeing that Gong Yimo liked his appearance, for the first time, Gong Dai felt that being good-looking was useful. Hence, he used more casual gestures to show off himself. The eagerness in his heart urged him to get closer and closer. Royal sister, let me continue to scrub your back. Gong Dai knew very well that Gong Yimo never minded such things. She didn't think that it was a big deal to expose her arms and legs in front of men. Especially when they were young, Gong Yimo often ate and lived with him to save trouble. Hence, she didn't reject his touch. That was why he had the chance to get some physical contact with her. She was clearly a child that she had raised single-handedly. She didn't know why, but when he used the towel to gently scrub her back unconsciously straightened and her body felt itchy and strange. She thought of something and couldn't help but shake her head violently. He was too much of a beast. Why would she have such thoughts? It was all Gong Dai's fault. He was too devilish. Looking like this, wasn't he seducing her to commit a crime? Hence, she grabbed Gong Dai's hand and said, "You must be tired. Come down and soak. You don't have to take care of me." Gong Dai's eyes lit up and he immediately agreed. Seeing him like this, Gong Yimo felt an inexplicable sense of annoyance. But then she thought, since the pool was so big, what did it matter? Therefore, she just watched as Gong Dai undid his belt layer by layer. Finally, when he pulled, all his clothes fell off, leaving him with only a pair of underwear. Oh my God! Why did she feel goosebumps all over her body? What's with this tense feeling? Gong Dai looked at her nervous expression and his heart leaped with joy. The fact that she was nervous proved that she also had feelings for him. He should be glad that he had a good body from years of martial arts practice. Gong Yimo wanted to close her eyes, but she felt that she shouldn't be so pretentious. When she opened her eyes, it seemed that she was too thick-skinned. However, Gong Dai's figure was really good. She might as well just look at it. No matter what, he was a child she raised. She had seen it countless times when he was young. Why couldn't she see it when he was older? She didn't know if it was intentional or not, but Gong Dai was very close to her after he entered the water. When Gong Yimo felt that it was inappropriate and wanted to walk away, Gong Dai slowly said, "How nice. I haven't talked with Royal Sister in a long time." However, he didn't think so in his heart. At this moment, he was only a meter away from Gong Yimo. When he thought about how she didn't wear clothes to bathe with him, that stimulating feeling spread from his spine to his scalp. It was to the extent that his eyes were dyed with suppressed desire. However, Gong Yimo couldn't possibly notice it in the steam. Gong Yimo wanted to forget that strange feeling of discomfort, so she started to seriously think of a topic to talk about. "And the Emperor is holding a banquet tomorrow. Can I go?" Gong Dai used her cup to pour a cup of wine. He took a sip and said lightly, "Are you going to choose a consort for me?" Gong Yimo choked and retorted softly, "You can choose too, okay." Gong Dai looked at her with a smile but didn't say anything. Being stared at by him like this, Gong Yimo couldn't help but lower her head. She didn't know why, but when she lowered her head to look at his slender and fair fingers casually playing with the wine cup, that posture, and that well-defined skin, actually made her mouth dry up. She wanted to drink, but realized that her cup had long been snatched away by Gong Dai. When she thought of them drinking from the same cup, Gong Yimo couldn't help but pat her face. Did she drink too much? Why did she become so strange? Gong Dai silently inched closer. Royal sister wants to choose a consort for me. Shouldn't you ask for my request? Gong Yimo hurriedly nodded to hide her awkwardness. When he came closer, she immediately noticed. She moved back at a speed that he couldn't detect before saying, My younger brother naturally deserves the best. Tell me. What request do you have? She refused to look at him, which made Gong Dai secretly happy. He moved closer again and whispered into Gong Yimo's ear. Royal sister, I want the best woman in this world. There was a sweet smell of wine on his body. When he came closer, Gong Yimo immediately retreated instinctively. However, when she retreated, she realized that she was already leaning against the wall of the pool and had nowhere to retreat to. Gong Dai didn't give her any more pressure. Instead, he stared at her closely. His gaze seemed to have warmth, and wherever it landed, Gong Yimo couldn't help but want to find something to cover it up. She looked up and forced a smile. Your request is too general. What's the best in this world? Gong Dai raised his eyebrows slightly. Even a casual movement from him was very pleasing to the eye. He smiled faintly and said, As long as it's better than you, it's fine. Gong Yimo heard him and looked up at him. However, at a glance, his black hair was draped over his shoulders, and his exquisite face was like an aquatic demon. She didn't dare to look again after one glance. She swallowed her saliva. She didn't know if it was because she had been soaking in the pool for too long, but she actually felt that she couldn't breathe. Royal sister, are you thirsty? A warm wine cup was pressed against Gong Yimo's lips. Gong Dai was able to take a big step forward because of this. The distance between the two of them was less than half an arm. Gong Yimo didn't dare to think too deeply about the panic that made her hair stand on end. She directly drank the remaining half of the wine from his hand. The sweet wine spilled out a little because she drank it too quickly. The golden wine flowed down the corner of her mouth and her slender neck, finally disappearing into her collarbone. Her beautiful curves were fully displayed when she raised her head. Gong Dai's eyes darkened and he almost couldn't control himself. At this moment, they were too close. It was too dangerous. Perhaps it was because it was too quiet when it was snowing, or because the water vapor was too hazy, or because the water temperature was too warm. They were in such a dangerous and ambiguous atmosphere. The two of them experienced the stimulation that made their bodies tremble and numb. For a moment, they were at a loss for words. Gong Dai didn't want to leave, but Gong Yimo didn't know how to leave. Her head was dizzy because of the wine, but her body was alert because of Gong Dai. You haven't said if you're bringing me along. Gong Yimo smiled and tried to change the topic. Little did she know that her cheeks were bright red and her eyes were moist. The beautiful curve of her neck and shoulders made people want to vomit blood. Gong Dai's Adam's apple moved. He felt as if there was a fire burning in his body. He felt very uncomfortable and painful, and his only salvation was right in front of him. It was so close, yet so far. Chapter 138. Gong Yimo felt her hair stand on end from his stare. She didn't know where she had exposed herself. As for the other party discovering her so quickly, she couldn't help but be even more vigilant. If other people also discovered who she was, then what was she going to do? Fortunately, her worries were unnecessary. The Emperor, who was so familiar with her, was only drinking cup after cup and didn't even look in her direction. Gong Che thought for a bit and said a few words to the people behind him. The two people who were originally following him retreated and went somewhere unknown. Gong Dai had too many people toasting him. He used the excuse that he was too young and couldn't hold his liquor to reject them all. When the Emperor saw this, he laughed loudly. You can reject the wine here, but when we go to the women's banquet, I'm afraid you can't." As he said this, he stood up shakily and walked a few steps towards Gong Dai. "Everyone else, continue to eat and drink. The two of us will go to the women's banquet alone to take a look." He seemed to be a bit drunk and laughed. "They must be discussing your marriage. Let's also go and see if there are any good people." Gong Dai was dragged away by the emperor with half of his shoulder. He was extremely anxious. He definitely didn't want to leave Gong Yimo here, but if he took her away, the emperor only brought Changxi alone. Changxi's martial arts were strong. If he found out, Gong Yimo would be in even more danger. For the 100th time, he was annoyed that his beauty had ruined things last night. He silently glanced at Gong Yimo and then left with the emperor. Once Gong Dai left, Gong Che could no longer control himself. He held a cup of wine and walked towards the official closest to Gong Yimo. However, he wasn't careful and directly bumped into him, drenching himself in wine. When the official saw this, he quickly said, "The crown prince probably can't hold his liquor, so don't drink anymore." Why don't you have anyone serving you?" "Who was that?" "Yes. It's you. Quickly bring the crown prince back to the palace to rest." Gong Yimo pointed at the tip of her nose in astonishment. But thinking that she had originally come to report her safety to Gong Che, she obediently agreed. She only hoped that when Gong Dai returned, he wouldn't be anxious because he couldn't find her. The moment her hand touched Gong Che's, it was grabbed tightly by his fiery hands. His entire body was leaning on Gong Yimo. His chest started to beat, giving Gong Che an illusion. When she wasn't around, his heart didn't seem to move, feel sad, or feel happy. But when she was near, his entire body seemed to come alive, as if a soul had been injected into him. Although Gong Yimo felt that it was strange, she still helped him out. They gradually left the people's line of sight, and unknowingly, they actually arrived at the lotus pond where they used to go boating together. Thinking back to that embarrassing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, Gong Yimo felt a little embarrassed, but Gong Che missed it very much and was also very glad. He was glad that he didn't hurt Gong Yimo that time, so she could still stand by his side and accompany him. It was very quiet here, because everyone had gone over to help. However, they were still afraid that someone would secretly monitor them, so Gong Che slightly waved his hand. Immediately, two shadows separated and blocked the two directions. Gong Che was still worried. He didn't want Gong Yimo to be threatened, so he ordered someone to bring over a small boat, saying that he wanted to take advantage of the alcohol to go boating. Gong Yimo only thought that Gong Che had something to say to her, so she lowered her head obediently and let him arrange it. She didn't know how anxious Gong Che was. His palms were wet with sweat, but he controlled his eyes and didn't glance at the person beside him. The boat arrived very quickly. Gong Yimo didn't forget that she was a waiter, so she quickly jumped onto the boat first and then helped Gong Che onto the boat. During this time, the two of them looked at each other for the first time. Gong Yimo only glanced at him once, then quickly looked away as if she was scalded. She finally felt that it was a little strange. Gong Che's gaze was too hot, as if it could melt people. She exerted strength in her legs and the boat sailed into the lake. At this time, the flowers and leaves in the lake had already withered, and the moonlight shone down, making it seem a little bleak. This boat had a cabin. Gong Yimo helped Gong Dai into the cabin to sit down. Just as she was about to get up, Gong Che forcefully pulled her into his arms. The cabin was very dark, and there was only a single lamp. It was also very small, making Gong Yimo inexplicably panic. Crown Prince Gage. Don't speak. Gong Che's slightly trembling voice sounded beside Gong Yimo's ear. He hugged her very tightly, and didn't want to hear any words of resistance from Gong Yimo. You're still alive. That's great. He hugged Gong Yimo tightly, as if he wanted to confirm if this person really existed. Gong Yimo's heart was slightly warmed. She felt that all her efforts had not been in vain. Gong Che really cared about her a lot. Gong Yimo patted his shoulder, to make him relax. Crown Prince Gidge, aren't I back now? How could anything happen to me? I'm someone who cherishes my life a lot. But this wasn't the main point. The main point was that Gong Che missed her a lot. So many days and nights, he had endured it bitterly. He wanted to hug this little vixen in his arms to sleep, to rub their heads together, and wake up together in the morning. He missed her so much that his heart ached. Tell her everything. He cared about her not because of some sibling relationship, but because he loved her. She loved him so deeply that she had to endure the pain of yearning for him at every moment. Gong Che's hurried breathing was accompanied by the fragrance of the wine. Gong Yimo felt a little ticklish, and couldn't help but shrink her neck. But the moment she moved, Gong Che leaned closer. She seemed to be able to feel Gong Dai's thin lips gently kissing the skin below her ear, and that feeling made her hair stand on end. Crown Prince Gidge. She pushed Gong Che away. Gong Che's eyes were hurt for a moment, but Gong Yimo didn't notice and forced herself to calm down. The heat in the small cabin made people sweat. Gong Yimo took a deep breath and forced a smile. Crown Prince Gidge, I'm fine. That's right, are your injuries all healed? The emptiness in his arms made Gong Che feel disappointed. He didn't want to discuss these things with Gong Yimo. He looked at Gong Yimo and swallowed his words several times. Why didn't you come to see me earlier? Why did you go to Shizhou? Is Gong Dai really that important to you? In your heart, is he more important than me? Why are you resisting my approach? But he couldn't ask any of these questions, and he couldn't say anything. The relationship between blood relatives was like an insurmountable gap that separated all possibilities between him and her. He suddenly remembered what the Empress had said. Yes, he couldn't wait any longer. He had to quickly become stronger, so strong that he could directly dominate her. So Gong Che's breathing gradually calmed down, but his eyes were still firmly locked onto Gong Yimo. Are you willing to go to Huai River with me? Chapter 139. His words stunned Gong Yimo. The more Gong Che thought about it, the more he felt that it was a good idea. If Gong Yimo went with him, not only would they be able to start this prosperous era together, he would also have enough time to move Gong Yimo and make her accept him and wait for him. As long as he became the emperor, he would definitely make Gong Yimo his empress. As long as she went with him, he would have a lot of time to do this. Gong Yimo was indeed a little moved because her illegal immigration plan was still under construction. It would be good for her to go and supervise it. But she also thought of Gong Dai. Gong Dai was now conferred the title of Prince Chi and was also appointed as the Imperial Guard of the Right. He had 50,000 soldiers and horses under him, so he definitely could not leave. Could it be that she would have to leave Gong Dai to do other things? Gong Che's eyes flashed with a bewitching light as he slowly said in a bewitching manner. If you go with me, not only can you start your logistics plan, you can also open a shop. It's better than you staying in the capital with your hands and feet tied, isn't it? He was right. Gong Yimo was now a dead person in the capital. She definitely could not show her face. Rather than staying here, it would be better to change her appearance and go out to do something big. Just as Gong Yimo opened her mouth to say something, a cold voice sounded. She will not go with you. The hull of the ship gently shook and the curtains of the cabin were torn open by internal force. Gong Dai stood at the bow of the ship with a cold face. The wind tore his robe and his eyes were filled with killing intent as they locked onto Gong Che. That naked killing intent made Gong Yimo stand up and slightly block Gong Che. But Gong Che stood up and walked past Gong Yimo to the deck to face Gong Dai. Why not? Under the moonlight, Gong Che was standing lower, so he raised his head slightly. For the first time, his smiling face was so cold. He straightened his back and looked straight at Gong Dai. If taking a step back meant giving up Gong Yimo, then even if his body was smashed into pieces, he would not back down. Gong Ju stood on the prow of the ship, looking down at Gong Che with a condescending gaze. His eyes were filled with mockery. How could a weak man like Gong Che compete with him for the royal sister? Royal sister is mine. She will only go with me. When Gong Dai said this, he couldn't help but look at Gong Yimo's expression. How he wished to see Gong Yimo recognize him, and then stand out to make Gong Che give up. Gong Yimo was captivated by his sorrowful expression. She suddenly felt sorry for him. Was she going to leave him again after being separated from him for only a year and a half? Sensing the change in Gong Yimo's emotions, Gong Che narrowed his eyes. Her hands and feet are tied in the capital. Only when she leaves here can she spread her wings and soar. You want Immerse to risk being discovered and stay here with you for your own selfish reasons. That's too much. Gong Dai paused. He pursed his thin lips and said firmly, I can protect her. Protect her. Gong Che sneered. Immerse is not a golden bird in a cage. She is more outstanding than any man in this world. She once said that once the canal was built, she would think of a way to monopolize the transportation and logistics. She even said that she wanted to steal the tributaries and trade with Lu Yi. She wanted to open her shops all over the country and even overseas. And you want to bind such a person to your side. Just for your own selfish reasons. Every word of his words hit Gong Ju's sore spot. Gong Ju's face turned pale, and he finally revealed a wry smile. He knew that Gong Yimo liked freedom. How could he not know how outstanding she was? But it was precisely because she was too outstanding that he couldn't let her go. Because once he let her go, more and more people would realize how good she was and come to snatch her away. Now, Royal Sister had never been moved by anyone. But once she met more people, what if she fell in love with someone else? Fall in love with someone else? Just the thought of it made his murderous aura explode. His eyes suddenly turned bloodshot, but the corners of his mouth turned up slightly. But what should I do? Royal Sister said before that everything she did was for me. Since she built it for me, why can't she give it up for me? His words were like a ruthless knife that pierced Gong Che's heart and made it bleed. He really didn't think that Gong Yimo would go to this extent for Gong Dai. He looked at Gong Yimo. His eyes were full of unwillingness and accusation. Wasn't it just the 3 years in the cold palace? Why couldn't he compare? Why couldn't he compare? Enough. Gong Yimo suddenly opened her mouth. She looked at Gong Che and Gong Dai tiredly and sighed. Tell me, as the elder brother and younger brother that I value the most, why are you arguing here? She scratched her hair in confusion and looked at them in puzzlement. Shouldn't you get along with each other? Why are you fighting against each other? Gong Yimo couldn't figure it out. It wasn't a big deal whether she left or not. Why did it seem like they were fighting over her? She didn't know what to do. Her indifferent words shocked Gong Che and Gong Dai. They looked at each other and saw the same emotions in each other's eyes. They were enduring and hurting their spirits. Yes, in Gong Yimo's heart, they were her most important family. They were only family. She would have thoughts of spending the rest of her life with many people, but they were the only ones she would never consider, and now, unless they wanted to break the ice, they could only pretend that nothing happened and get along with each other. Get along with each other. The arrogance of the sword on the boat was too obvious. Gong Yimo seemed to have something in her heart. She looked at them with a complicated expression. The wind from the lake made her heart cold and her back cold. She asked hesitantly, tentatively, and cautiously, "You haven't answered me. Why are you fighting against each other?" Her sharp eyes swept across the uneasiness on Gong Che's face and the coldness on Gong Dai's face. A strange thought suddenly appeared in her mind. This world. Had it gone crazy? Why would she have such a thought? Gong Che's eyes flashed. In the end, he reached out and touched Gong Yimo's hair. Under the moonlight, his expression softened again and he sighed helplessly. "You probably don't know. Gong Dai is a ruthless person. I'm just afraid of being influenced by him." Gong Dai stared at his hand and smiled coldly. However, he still played along with his words. "Recently, you took advantage of the Emperor's guilt and used his hands to kill countless people. What right do you have to talk about me?" Their words finally dispelled Gong Yimo's strange thoughts. Perhaps they didn't like the way the other party did things and were worried about her. However, she still lowered her head and said softly, "Then can't you get along with each other?" In her previous life, they had a good working relationship. Gong Dai looked at Gong Che and narrowed his eyes. Gong Che also smiled coldly. Although the two of them were only 2 meters apart, it was as if one was in purgatory and the other was on a cliff. "This matter. We will handle it." Chapter 140. Since he said so, Gong Yimo only nodded and didn't say anything else. With Gong Dai messing things up, Gong Che definitely didn't have a chance to persuade her anymore. He could only watch as Gong Yimo and Gong Dai left the palace. On the way, Gong Dai didn't say a word. He was obviously angry. Gong Yimo also felt awkward. She wasn't stupid, she just didn't want to use her brain. However, she was shocked by Gong Che and Gong Dai's recent abnormalities. Their concern for her. Was it because of their relationship with her? If it was, wouldn't it be too much? That kind of passion made Gong Yimo a little afraid and resistant. Gong Dai was still angry at first, but when he saw Gong Yimo looking as if she was thinking about something, his heart trembled. He immediately threw the unhappiness from before to the back of his mind. He quickly thought, did Gong Che say something to her before he arrived? Actually, when it came to expressing feelings, Gong Dai really didn't have any experience. On one hand, he wanted to abandon his identity as her brother, but on the other hand, he wanted to use this identity to get closer to her. If Gong Yimo really sensed his feelings now, he wouldn't know what to do. He was unbelievably ruthless to outsiders, but in reality, Gong Dai was still a virgin, royal sister. He opened his mouth, but remembered that he was angry. He was a little annoyed and arrogant, so he tilted his head and didn't look at her. "Are you really going to leave with Gong Che?" His voice was clear and low, but there was an indescribable grievance in it. Gong Yimo came back to her senses and looked at him, feeling a little guilty. In front of her. He was clearly a 13-year-old boy. What was she thinking? Gong Yimo held his hand and laughed softly. "Don't worry, no matter what, I'll always be on your side. After all, you're the one who grew up with me." As she spoke, she leaned on Gong Dai's shoulder tiredly. Gong Dai was getting bigger and bigger. So his shoulders were becoming more solid, and he could be relied on. Her closeness made all the unhappiness in Gong Dai's heart disappear. Actually, he was often unsatisfied with Gong Yimo, but as long as she took the initiative, he would be very, very satisfied. This was the first time Gong Che wanted to kill someone. He looked at his powerless hands and felt a deep sense of self-loathing. He had never killed anyone before. Even if he did kill someone, he would let someone else do it. Therefore, his hands were clean. At least, he had never been directly stained with blood. But now, he wished that he could have outstanding martial arts skills. This way, he could also protect Gong Yimo. He could too. At the thought of Gong Yimo and Gong Dai living together, he was so jealous that he wanted to go crazy. They were clearly family. One was the elder brother, and the other was the younger brother. Why was she so biased that she could stay by the younger brother's side but not by his? His appearance frightened everyone. Someone went to report to the Empress. When the Empress heard it, she sighed deeply. We can't wait any longer. Shui Xian, pass down my decree. 3 days later, there will be a banquet in the palace. Invite the families on the list to the banquet. There must be no delays. The water deity hurriedly took a scroll, and on it were densely packed small words. After thinking for a while, the Empress said, since it's obvious that it's a consort selection, it's not good to be biased. Call the other princes who are of suitable age over. Yes, Your Highness. After Shui Xian left, the Empress looked at her back with an unreadable expression until she disappeared. She secretly made up her mind. Don't blame me. Everything Imperial Mother has done is for your sake. After returning home, Gong Yimo went straight to sleep. She didn't like to think. Once she thought, she felt tired and only wanted to sleep. Gong Dai sighed. He stroked her hair and covered her with the blanket. Seeing her fall asleep with her brows slightly knitted, he felt his heart ache for no reason. He knew in his heart that he couldn't lock her up, but he couldn't let go. The consequences, he couldn't bear. After he left with a long sigh, Gong Yimo opened her eyes. Her gaze was a little confused. If she didn't notice it, it was fine. Once she noticed it, she felt that Gong Dai's every action was unusual. Was it really just a sibling relationship? 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. In these few days, other than working, Gong Dai spent most of his time with Gong Yimo. He acutely felt Gong Yimo's uneasiness. So these few days, he played the role of a younger brother with all his heart. He obediently allowed Gong Yimo to manipulate him, as if they had returned to the past, so the doubts in Gong Yimo's heart gradually disappeared. Gong Dai was going to attend the Empress banquet. Gong Yimo made faces at him as she combed his hair. This is obviously a matchmaking banquet. When the time comes, you have to tell me which family's girl you like. Gong Dai didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but he still responded gently. His devilish eyes narrowed slightly as he spoke intentionally or unintentionally. The Crown Prince is obviously the main character of this banquet. I'm just going to go through the motions. After he finished speaking, he saw that Gong Yimo's expression didn't change at all. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He then said, Royal sister, who do you want the Crown Prince to marry? This question stumped Gong Yimo. She didn't know much about the womenfolk in the capital. Anyway, it didn't matter who it was, as long as it wasn't Su Miaolon. She didn't want to take revenge on her, but to let Su Miaolon marry Gong Che. This was the only thing she wouldn't agree to. Seeing that she was really thinking about it, Gong Dai smiled from the bottom of his heart, then he obediently let Gong Yimo tie up his hair. Looking at the two of them in the mirror, one standing and one sitting, his expression was full of sweetness. If only it could always be like this, it would be great, just the two of them. But on the other side, Gong Che was having a hard time. There was no heating in Feng Chi Palace, so it was very cold from the inside out. Mother, I won't go. Gong Che stood stubbornly in front of the Empress. His expression was cold, as if he was talking about something that didn't belong to him. Hearing this, the Empress put down her cup. Today was a rare big day, so she was dressed very luxuriously. Her Majesty as the Empress was fully displayed, making her look a little unreasonable. At this time, after hearing Gong Che's words, she wasn't angry. Instead, she said calmly, "This matter is approved by His Majesty. Whether you agree or not, you have to go." Hearing this, Gong Che looked at her coldly. His eyes didn't look like he was looking at his mother, but as if he was looking at an enemy. The Empress's move of acting first and reporting later caught him off guard. The Empress was scared by his gaze, but she forced herself to be calm and snorted. What, you don't want Gong Yimou? Her words poked at Gong Che's sore spot, making Gong Che suddenly calm down, but he couldn't say anything. As expected, only Gong Yimou could suppress him now. The Empress sat on the phoenix seat, looked out of the hall, and sighed faintly. Mother admits that you've grown up and have the ability. Once the matter of building the canal is completed, you'll have great achievements, but have you thought about it? How long will it take to build the canal? During this time, how many unforeseen events will happen? If no one in the capital protects your position, what happened last time will still happen. Chapter 141. After that, she looked at Gong Che's pained expression and sighed. The Liu family is useless. Among the descendants, the best one is a Jinsher. Father's death is too much of a blow to the Liu family. Even if the canal can bring the Liu family a lot of money, it will be in the future. As for Gong Yimou, will she wait for you? The analysis was very thorough, but it made Gong Che feel a chill in his bones. His body swayed and he almost couldn't stand. Why did it have to be like this? Why were these people and these things all obstructing him? Obviously. He only wanted Gong Yimou. He closed his eyes and his sorrowful expression made the Empress' heart ache. But she couldn't be soft-hearted, so she took a sip of tea and whispered with an inexplicable expression. Gong Yimou. She's almost 14, right? Mother. Gong Dai clenched his fists tightly. He suddenly raised his head and his eyes were bloodshot. He looked very frightening. Must it be now? Choosing a concubine in front of Immerse. I can't do it. I really can't do it. Every word seemed to be squeezed out from the gap between his teeth. His words made the Empress think deeply. Suddenly, she realized something and covered her mouth to laugh. My silly son. Gong Yimou. She still doesn't know about your feelings, right? Gong Che didn't say anything. How could he dare to let her know? And you also know that your feelings are against the world. So, why don't you go and ask her? Gong Che looked at her helplessly. Ask her what? The Empress smiled. Silly child. Mother is naturally doing it for your own good. You go and ask Gong Yimou now. Tell her everything. If she is also interested in you, won't it be a happy ending? All the problems will be solved. The Empress's words made Gong Che's heart tremble. But his reason told him that Gong Yimou would not agree. Seeing Gong Che's pale and complicated expression, the Empress was an experienced person after all, so she added another dose of ruthless medicine. Even if she is not interested in you now, you should at least let her know your feelings. As long as she doesn't directly reject you, then you still have a chance, right? You can tell her your current difficulties and let her wait for you. If she is completely not interested in you, there's no point in you persisting like this, right? Her words made Gong Che's heart was restless. God knows, he had wanted to do this for a long time, but he didn't dare to do so, because he felt that Gong Yimou would definitely not accept him. But what if? What if Immerse has a trace of good feelings for him? This kind of thought of this idea. He felt fear, panic, anticipation, and sweetness. He thought that if Gong Yimou also had the heart, no, as long as she didn't directly refuse him, then he could wait. Reject the marriage alliance and continue to wait. Yes, he should have done this long ago. The Empress said at the right time, Immerse is now in Qi Manor, right? And Gong Dai. He should be on his way. Now, you might be able to see Gong Yimo. Gong Che couldn't hold it in any longer. He bid farewell to the Empress and hurried towards Qi Manor. Seeing him leave in such a hurry, the Empress held her heart and sighed. Her son had already turned into a demon. He loved someone to the point that he was like a demon. But it didn't matter. She would pull him back bit by bit, even if she had to give up everything. When he left, Gong Dai felt uneasy. He hesitated for a moment. After thinking about it, bringing Gong Yimo into the palace would make him even more uneasy. So he could only order people to watch over them and not let anyone in. Finally, he thought for a moment, and then added another sentence. Not even the princess. After giving his orders, he leapt onto his horse and glanced at Qi Manor. His eyes gradually turned from cold to satisfied. He didn't want much. As long as he could hide Gong Yimo by his side, it would be enough. After he left, Gong Che walked out from the shadows after a long time. He glanced at the vermilion gate with a deep fervor in his eyes. Gong Dai couldn't keep him locked up, this was something he was very clear about. So he took out something from his sleeve. It was something that looked like a firework. If Gong Yimo was here, she would definitely remember it. At that time, while she was concocting the poison, she had also casually made some small things. This sound signal flare was one of the finished products. Gong Yimo was originally reading in the courtyard when she suddenly heard a strange sound. She jerked her head up and indeed saw the red firework exploding in the sky during the day. This was the signal flare that she had given to Gong Che. Although she now had a strange feeling towards Gong Che, when the signal flare went off, she couldn't help but go take a look. She hoped that he hadn't encountered some trouble. Although it wasn't likely that he was in the Imperial City, what was the reason for him to set off a signal flare near Qi Manor? With this thought, she hurriedly went out. She didn't expect to be stopped at the main entrance. Gong Yimo even knew this person. His name was Lo Chi and he was Gong Dai's #1 guard. Gong Yimo was somewhat puzzled but still asked politely, "I'm wearing a scarf and going out for a stroll. Why are you stopping me?" Lo Chi couldn't see Gong Yimo's face and could only reply militarily. "His Highness has ordered. No one is allowed to enter or leave." Hearing that it was Gong Dai's order, Gong Yimo smiled and waved her hand carelessly. "Since it's Gong Dai's order, don't worry. I'm fine." But at this moment, Lo Chi looked up at Gong Yimo and said, "Including the princess." His words caused Gong Yimo's smile to freeze on her face. It was a little strange, but because she was wearing a scarf, they couldn't see it. "Are you guys going to put me under house arrest?" "It can't be. Gong Dai wouldn't do that. Are you guys mistaken?" Lo Chi lowered his head and said, "That's right. Including the princess, no one is allowed to enter or leave this place." His words made Gong Yimo feel strange. Why would Gong Dai give such an order? How could this be? But she didn't have time to argue with them. She muttered, "I must go out today. Let's see what you can do to me." Humph. With that, she strode forward. At this moment, 2 swords crossed in front of her and Lo Chi's cold voice was still beside her. "Princess, don't make things difficult for us." This time, Gong Yimo was really angry. How could Gong Dai give the order to lock her up? Even if she was in danger of being discovered if she went out now, it shouldn't be to this extent, right? Don't forget, she was pretty good at fighting. Her face turned cold. "I don't believe that you guys would dare to stop me from entering my brother's residence." With that, she didn't even look at the swords and walked straight ahead. Those people didn't dare to stop her and kept retreating. Lo Chi couldn't do anything and could only helplessly watch Gong Yimo leave. "Little Chi, quickly go into the palace and report to His Highness." Little Chi was anxious. "Brother Luo, why did you let the princess go? Your martial arts are so good, you might not be a match for the princess. If we don't stop her, how are we going to explain to His Highness when he comes back? Looking at Little Chi's silly look, Lo Chi sighed with a straight face and looked in the direction Gong Yimo left. You just have to remember that if we hurt the princess, His Highness won't let us off. You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.